All right, looks like we are live for the second debate of our debate doubleheader night. This debate, number two, I got distracted. Gentlemen, turn those webcams on. Don't be shy. I'm feeling a little lonely here. So, again, we are here for our debate doubleheader night. This one is between James W. and TRock, Noah's Ark, and the Genesis flood. So this is definitely going to be a comprehensive debate. Good to see the audience here after the first debate in our doubleheader night here, hosted by For Truth Ministries. Debate number one was Kent Hovind and Snake Was Right, Transitional Fossils. That one flew by. That one was a ton of fun, engaging, lively, very entertaining. So if you haven't yet seen that one, when this debate is over, definitely check that one out. And now we're here for debate number two for tonight, Noah's Flood and Noah's Ark. James W., TRock, gentlemen, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Donnie.
All right. Well, you know what? As we like to do before we get into the fun, before you guys battle it out as you are here in the debate octagon, I do appreciate your time. Let's kind of break the ice and just get to know each other a little bit. You both have been here before on the channel, but we're always getting new subscribers and new people who are entering the debate community. So why don't we start with you? James, how you been? Nice Hawaiian shirt and a little bit about your channel.
Thanks, Donnie. So I fancy myself as a counter apologist, and I co-host with Amy Newman on the Amy Newman channel, and we try to do at least 3 shows a week. Sometimes we don't quite make it, but we try to do at least 3 shows a week. We try to have open mics. We always ask people to come on, tell us what they believe and why, and try to have fun, engaging conversations tackling, the hard-hitting issues of the day and theology. So thank you.
Thank you, James. You were just here a week or two ago for, I would say, a debate to remember with Nephilim Free on dinosaurs and man, did they coexist? So if people in the chat haven't seen that one, please check it out. TRock, good to have you as well. You were just here a little while ago as well for a debate with Mark Reed. So, you guys are becoming seasoned debaters. TRock, how you been, and a little bit about yourself.
Been good, been busy as usual. I think people are kind of getting used to seeing me a little bit now. Everybody knows my background is engineering and manufacturing. And I'll be honest with you, I do not know anything about James' background. I've watched a couple of your debates, so I've kind of seen some of the ideas that you present, but I don't know anything about your background. As a person coming from an engineering and manufacturing background, I try to be very pragmatic about my approach to both the arguments and the actual science itself. So anyway, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully the audience will get a good deal of. My goal is to edify those that believe, to build them up, to show them that our position is reasonable. And so hopefully we will bring a lot of that out in this debate.
Absolutely. TRock, James W., appreciate the intros from the both of you. To everybody in the audience, if you like what you're seeing tonight from James W. and TRock, again, their links are in the description box for you to find more from these gentlemen. So both will be back here as well. So this isn't the last we're going to see of them. James is going to be here debating Kent, the Evolution Debate Challenge Series, the hominid fossil record. So I'm pumped for that. That's next month. And TRock will be here in August again. He'll be debating T-Jump. So we're just working on some final details there, but that'll definitely be a ton of fun. Okay, so for the audience sake, let's go over the format. Okay, so we're going to be having 12-minute opening statements. James is going to start us off with his Noah's Ark and Noah's Flood, fact or fiction. Then we're going to have 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttals, followed by an open discussion. We're going to keep it free flowing and, as equally timed as possible, where the debaters are asking each other questions pertaining to the topic, a comprehensive topic tonight. Then a 5-minute concluding statement. And then, as always, this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We're going to have an audience Q&A. Please make sure you're tagging me at Standing for Truth. That way I won't miss them. And we'll have a solid audience Q&A. So, James W., let's waste no more time and get right into it. So we're going to hand it over to you. 12 minutes. Floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Okay, hey guys. So I was just here a couple weeks back talking about dinosaurs. And I'm going to start off a little like how I started that debate off. And it's the old adage that when you start telling lies, these lies tend to get bigger and more grandiose. And unfortunately, we have to contend with the fact that there's actually quite a few lies in the Bible. Lies, myths, whatever you want to call them. But there's certainly a lot of things in there that are not literal, actual history. And this is probably one of the biggest whoppers that they have served up for us from the Bible. Our good friend, the Yahwist, and our even better buddy, P, the priestly source. These are the two sources who conjured the story up. But to begin, that you have to really ask yourself a question before you're going into a debate like this. And I would ask you, if it wasn't true, would you even want to know? Now, if you're just going to pick up the Bible and read a story about a global flood and arbitrarily choose to believe that is true, and you're willing to accept any ad hoc explanations that the young earth crowd can give, as long as you can keep on believing and that's what you want to do, fine. You have freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of belief. I'm not threatening to have you killed and do mean things to you after you're dead if you refuse to accept what I think the overwhelming consensus shows. So, did the global flood happen? And of course not. The answer is of course not. Of course this is a myth. Now, the flood story has quite a lot of troubling moral and theological implications. I'm not really going to focus on those because I know when I was a Christian, they really didn't cause me any trouble. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But the young earth crowd, they need this flood. They really love this flood. They coddle it and cherish it because they use it as an ad hoc explanation for virtually everything that we see around us, the things that they have no way to explain. So, I mean, they really get their money's worth out of this flood, and they will fight to protect it because otherwise they don't really have any answers for quite a lot of questions. So the first thing that stands out about this story from the Bible, and as I said, it's from Yahwist and the priestly source. These are the two people who wrote this story, adapted from earlier pagan myths, of course. But the Bible's not afraid to invoke magic when it needs to. It does it all the time. It's not shy about magic. But what strikes me about this story is actually how sparingly the authors used magic in the story. They use magic very little. For instance, like, how did they get the ark? Did God just poof the ark? No. He gave them a rough blueprint, but they had to build it. How'd they keep the ark from leaking? Did God just seal the ark himself? No. He said, coat it with pitch on the inside and out. How did they care for the animals? Did God just magically make it so the animals wouldn't need to eat? Did God put them in some type of supernatural hibernation mode where they just laid there for the entire time the boat was floating? No, they didn't. In fact, God used Noah and his family as zookeepers, and he told them to bring provisions for all the animals. So they had to bring provisions for all the animals because that's what the Bible says. That's not what I'm saying. That's what God said. Now, of course, originally they said they were told to take 2 animals, but the priestly source came by and he put his thinking cap on, and he knew that wouldn't work because, of course, the first thing you want to do when you get off the ark is to sacrifice animals to your deity. And if they only had 1 pair of all the clean animals, then they would be sending those animals to extinction, and they wouldn't be able to sacrifice more animals to Yahweh because he really likes sacrifice. He really, really likes having humans kill animals and burn them to him. So they identify that, so we have a little bit more of these animals. But that really is not sufficient to explain the things that we see. Because, for instance, cheetahs have a genetic bottleneck. They have surprisingly low diversity. And that's because they had that bottleneck about 10,000 years ago where they were down to less than 10 cheetahs. And we can clearly see that in the genetics. They're talking this flood happened like 4,000 years ago. And we don't see that type of bottleneck in all the other animals, which was what we would expect if we were down to 7 pairs of some and 1 pair of the others. So how'd the water get here? Was it magic? Where'd the water come from? No, it rained a lot. Well, it rained and rained and rained. And just when you thought it was going to stop raining, it continued to rain. But they figured out that wouldn't account for all the water. So you see, God, when he created the earth, he had it preloaded because, of course, he knew he would have to genocide his own creation. So he had the earth preloaded with water under the crust to be able to commit the genocide that he, of course, knew he would have to commit. The only overt magic in the story where God directly does things would be how the animals got to Noah. God just told the animals, hey, go to this guy. He's going to put you on the ark. And then God closed the door. He physically shut the door to the ark. But everything else seems to operate pretty much within the work of reality. It just tells you that the people who wrote this book, they really just believed that all you had to do was get a really big boat, put lots of animals on it, take the food, put some people on there to take care of them, and everything would be okay. That's all you would need to do. And of course, we know that that's absurd. The zoo that I went to when I was growing up, Miami Metro Zoo down in Miami, they have about 500 species on staff, and they have dozens of zookeepers on staff, dozens of zookeepers in a modern zoo. But you're telling me a family 4,000 years ago with no experience to speak of, on a boat, they were able to take care of them all, just under 10 people? Doesn't really make sense. But the thing is that young earth creationists will accept virtually any reasoning that you can throw at them as long as they can keep on believing. Because it's not about what's true or not. It's just about what you can make yourself believe. And the problem is, well, there's actually lots of problems. The challenge is coming up with which problems to list for this story, because if one peg of the story falls apart, the whole story falls apart, because you only get the story from the Bible. But if the Bible's wrong, you could just you don't need to prove every single point wrong. If you can prove one thing wrong, the Bible's not trustworthy, then you can disbelieve the whole thing, because there's no evidence really for any of this outside the Bible. And on this channel, Donnie himself has put out videos that talk about the genetics, and where he has taken all the big cats, all the felines that we have today, and he has conglomerated them, morphed them all into one cat, or one kind of cat, that got off of Noah's Ark. And he's saying that's what accounts for all the diversity of cats today, is that 2 big cats got off Noah's Ark, and then today we have lions, tigers, cheetahs, jaguars, panthers, all of it. Except that doesn't work. And that's because we already know, we have ancient depictions of these animals, and we know that 4,000 years ago, a lion was a lion, a tiger was a tiger, a house cat was a house cat. They had all those animals back then, and they were pretty much in their modern form. So if I were to say to a young earth creationist that to talk about evolution, where we have large-scale changes taking place very slowly over a long period of time, they would say that's ridiculous. That's not true, because you can't see it happening. But if they needed to make their arc story work, well, then you can have rapid changes happening in 1, maybe 200 years or less, because they need that to make their story work. And if the flood were true, we could look at the natural world, and we could look at the reality around us, and we would see everything consistent with that. except we find nothing of the sort. After the Enlightenment, the birth of the scientific era, these scientists went out. They were devout men of faith. Of course, they were men because they didn't allow women to do things like that because they were following the tenets of Christianity. But they were devout men of faith, and they thought that when they looked at the natural world, they would see the things that they had read in the Bible to be true and be able to prove that with science. But were they in for a shocker? They actually found no scientific proof for the Bible. They found lots of things that contradict the childhood fables they were taught and had believed. And just touch briefly on an issue like geology. We know what large floods do. We've had them throughout human history. Talk about the Missoula floods that happened in the northwestern United States about 15,000 years ago. We have visible ripple marks 40 feet high, thousands of feet long, that dot that landscape. And we know that that's what floods do. We see formations like the Grand Canyon, but we see a river going through it. And anytime you see any formation like that, you see a river going through it, because rivers make canyons, not this catastrophic global flood idea. And if the global flood, remember, the Missoula flood happened 15,000 years ago. The Bible flood, they're talking that happened about 4,000 years ago. Oh, if that were true, we would see these marks all over the world, very clear, very plain to see. You'd have formations like the Grand Canyon all over the world. You'd see it all over the place. But why do we only see it in one spot? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. You would only believe this if you arbitrarily choose to believe it as an article of faith. It's certainly not what the evidence is going to lead you. And it puts us to a question, a major question. So if you want to go with the biblical, literal interpretation, well, you have to say the archaeologists are wrong, the historians are wrong, the biologists are wrong, paleontologists are wrong, anthropologists are wrong, there's problems in physics, geology, they're all wrong. They don't know what they're talking about in their fields because they say this flood could not happen and certainly did not happen. Or maybe, just maybe, the Bible literal story written of in Genesis is not actual history. Maybe it's a man-made myth, just like we see pervading all throughout other cultures. We have myths similar to this from a pagan perspective that predate the writing of the Bible by hundreds of years. It is overwhelmingly likely that the people who wrote the Bible, they had read these sources before and they said, hey, that's pretty cool. All these other religions and cultures, they've all got a flood myth, but we don't have a flood myth. Well, guess what? Now we have a flood myth, because that's what happens when you're making stuff up as you go along. And I think I'll leave it at there. I want to see some of the arguments that TRock brings up, and so I can respond to those specifically. But thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, James. That was 12 minutes, and just on
right
time.
on the dot.
Right on the dot. Much appreciated. So, okay, TRock, we're going to hand it over to you now, and you also have 12 minutes for an opening statement. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to set a timer here. Is my audio coming in okay?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay, good. I do have a little problem with my phone. Does not like to act right, so I apologize. I won't be able to use my timer on my phone. It's kind of messed up. Anyway, if you would give me a 1 minute reminder.
Absolutely.
So the direction James took is fine for me. Whenever I prepared, I was really looking more about the feasibility of the ark itself. He didn't really talk a whole lot about that, so I'm not going to use my slides right now. We can probably go to some of that content during the open discussion portion, but instead I'm just going to kind of talk along the lines that he discussed. So I'll just kind of give the positive ark model first. It is not what he referred to as a legend. It's copied from ancient other ancient legends. Absolutely not true. It's the opposite. We know that because the historic detail given in the book of Genesis is exquisite in detail, and out of that you come out with some facts and figures pertaining to the ark itself, pertaining to the people, pertaining to the animals, and probably most important is the table of nations that comes out immediately after the flood account in Genesis. So those things absolutely distinguish it head and shoulders above other flood legends and ancient histories that pagan religions or ancient civilizations might have. So in the ark model, we have realistic dimensions that are seaworthy. I do have a reference that the audience might be interested in looking at. Go to creation.com. There is an article titled Noah's Ark, a feasibility study. If you just type those words into their search, it'll be probably the very first thing that pops up. You need to read through that. What they've done is they have shown through, it was a Korean group that did this study. They showed that the dimensions given in the Bible are seaworthy. They're extremely stable. They're actually optimal among a wide variety of ship designs. They compared to, I believe there were a total of 12 candidates, including Noah's Ark. And so out of 12 candidates, Noah's Ark stood head and shoulders in most categories above the others. A few of them had slight advantages in certain aspects, but then lost a lot of advantage in other aspects. Of course, the Ark was not a sailing ship, as is commonly compared in debates like this from the skeptics. It was not a sailing ship at all, had no mast, had no sailing stresses per se, rotational stress and torsion stress, that kind of thing, to contend with. So the Bible gives us very solid engineering specs for how, or basically for the shape, and then the wood is just called gopher wood. Nobody really knows what that is. James is correct that the Bible does prescribe how to seal it up. And so that little bit of information alone, the closest relative to the Genesis flood account is probably the Epic of Gilgamesh. Its details are completely wrong. There's nothing engineering stable about Gilgamesh's dimensions that he gives or anything else. It's a very, as a matter of fact, one of the important things to understand about ancient culture is that the practice was that people would take a written account like Genesis or like anything. What they would do is they would take it. And so today, plagiarism is this idea where you steal somebody else's work, put your name on it, and take credit for yourself as having done that work. But in ancient times, plagiarism was actually quite the opposite. You stole somebody else's work, you changed it to your liking and left their name on it to try to give it credibility because the original author had the credibility, whereas your name doesn't really mean anything. So their idea of plagiarism was very different. But the point here is ancient cultures, they would do this. And what they would do is they would take a writing like the Genesis flood account, and then they would change a bunch of details. They would spice it up to make it more dramatic, more entertaining, that kind of thing. And then they would haul it off to a foreign country and sell it to a king somewhere to put in his library. And so this was actually a career choice for some people to do this sort of thing, to go around collecting writings from around the world. And so it is of no surprise whatsoever that most of the flood legends that you do read about, for two reasons, that one that I just named, they're completely corrupted compared to the Genesis account. The other reason is that they're completely corrupted is that biblical writings have been found literally by the thousands, by the tens of thousands of copies. And so there are so many copies that all you have to do is line all the copies up and try and find the differences between them to see what the original looked like. But the issue here is that the copies are so consistent and the differences are so minor, it shows how faithfully that the writings were preserved generation after generation after generation. Now that's very different than the Epic of Gilgamesh, than any of the the other flood legends that you might have read about, because those people, they did not faithfully copy the same thing letter for letter the way the Bible was done. Instead, they are subject to the corruption of oral tradition, basically losing copies that they did have, if they even made any. The point is, not a single one of those accounts was preserved over and over and over and over again. So when people like James say that the biblical account was derived from ancient accounts, this is one way we know for absolute fact that is not the case. And also because the oldest copies that we have of the biblical manuscripts are just that. They're copies. The oldest one you have is a copy. What that means is it's a copy of an original that you don't have. So you don't know how old the original is. There is literally no earthly way James or any other scholar on this planet can know exactly what the date of the original copies of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, so on and so forth. Nobody knows what that age is, except you have to read the biblical text is the only clues that you would have. But if you a priori dismiss it, then you're missing all of the most important clues there. So anyway, I want to give a positive model for the ark. It is a seaworthy vessel. The number of animals is described in the Bible. There's 2 of every unclean, 7 pairs of every clean animal, which implies to me that there were 14 of each kind of clean animal, but literally only 2 of each kind of unclean animal. So 2 cats, but take cattle, for example, there would have been 14 head of cattle, 7 male, 7 female, that kind of thing. And so from that, we absolutely do, through standard modern biology, we can predict from there whether or not we should have the biodiversity that we have on Earth today. And it is actually a very trivial thing. If James or any other skeptic wants to actually look at what biological limits are, we'll find out that it's such a non-issue that it's surprising that they even attempt to bring it up. But the reality is they're not really looking at the details. They're kind of hand waving past it. So cats were brought up. I like the example of bears just because I know the specific number. There are about 8 species of bears on the planet. Bears are unclean. That means there were only 2 bears on the ark. And to have 8 species of bear in 4,400 years is absolutely trivial. One of the things that we do know from modern biology is that speciation actually happens, to the big surprise of evolutionary scientists. Speciation can actually happen in a single generation. Case in point is the marbled crayfish. I just recently learned about that a few months ago. 1 generation crayfish basically speciated by duplicating their entire genome, and the subpopulation that came out of that was not backward compatible for interbreedability with the parent population. And so they literally got their own species name out of that. 1 generation. So it is so trivial because basically every time a pair of animals has offspring, as long as there's a male and a female, in most animals that don't reproduce asexually, as long as there's a male and a female, you already have a subpopulation. You always already have the potential for a subpopulation. And so mom and dad can have a litter this year. That litter will basically, in most animals, it'll be mature before the end, before 1 full year is even up, and they'll already be sexually mature, as a matter of fact. And so mom and dad can continue to have litters the next year, depending on the type of animal, of course. So each time that they do this, they have, some animals have the potential of having 2 or 3 subpopulations come out of a single litter. Dogs and cats commonly have 4, 5, 6 pups or kittens at a time. That's easily 2 or 3 subpopulations. All they have to do is just move to a different location. And in an empty planet, that's exactly what you would expect them to do. So I think I'll wrap it up right here and save the rest of it for the open discussion, and look forward to that part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. TRock with a minute to spare that we can throw into the open discussion. So we're now moving, gentlemen, into the 8-minute uninterrupted rebuttal round. And James W., we are going to hand it over to you for 8 minutes. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Sounds good. So, yeah, the feasibility of the ark. I think just looking at the ark by itself, I think that's not so compelling, because I think Christians are they're more than willing to invoke magic for things that the Bible says straightforward. So that's why I choose not to spend so much time on that. But he says that the ark was seaworthy by its dimensions, yet it's much longer than humans have ever been able to build a seaworthy boat made out of wood. I guess the ratio is right, but it's still way too big, bigger than any seaworthy vessel we've ever built in modern times. Let's see. Flood myths, everybody's got them, all cultures, it's pervasive. He wants to say his is the real one, but I mean, it really is just only makes common sense that this is a running theme running throughout the region, and even outside the region we see it. Doesn't it necessarily prove that it's not true, but it certainly does make you think a little bit. And he's talking about the original texts of the Bible when they were written. Well, because they were based off of copies, which were based off oral traditions. So you want to know when the oral tradition started to first be written down. But we know that Israel, Judea, did not exist as a separate people. You can't really push it back much further than 1000 BC, and that's being quite generous. Very few reputable scholars would even push it therefore. So talking about these biological limits, like I said, if I were to say that species can change very slowly over a long period of time, you would jump in and say, that's ridiculous, it doesn't happen. But if you said it happened very fast, then you would say, oh, okay, that makes sense. But actually, it doesn't. So he says speciation can happen rapidly, maybe, but that's not the norm. It's certainly not the norm in the wild. It's not the type of conditions that you would have getting off of this ark. Based on the way animals are distributed throughout the world, only existing in certain areas because they evolved there. They did not migrate there from the Middle East 4,000 years ago, or at least we certainly have no evidence that they migrated from the Middle East 4,000 years ago. They exist where they are because they can exist there, because if they couldn't exist there, they wouldn't have evolved there. Yeah, that's, of course, what biology is going to tell us, but the problem is, on the archaeological side, we have numerous buildings and structures that are dated to before the time of the flood, during the time of the flood, and after the time of the flood. We also have cultures that existed prior to the flood. They didn't notice the flood while it happened because they were still here, and they have persisted to this day. I think one of the common dates that they give is like 2340 BC for the ark, but that there were 8 people in the world. Egypt was well into the 6th dynasty. Sargon of Akkad was doing his thing with the Akkadian Empire. And he was a pagan, by the way. He did not worship Yahweh. It really just does not give the impression that not even a century or two ago, 8 people got off of Noah's Ark. They all spoke one language. They wrote the same language, and they all worshiped Yahweh. But yet, very soon after, we've got people speaking different languages with different writing types and worshiping other gods. Now, you have to ask yourself, these people had undeniable evidence that Yahweh existed, right? Their parents, grandparents, saw God flood the world. They know beyond a shadow of a doubt this God is real, and he gets really mad when people don't do what he likes. And the thing that makes him actually more mad than anything else in the world is when you worship other gods. So, of course, naturally, that's the first thing they would want to do, would be to set up other religions that have nothing to do with the God of the Bible, Judaism. They're completely independent traditions. Their languages are completely different, like nothing we see in the Middle East. You could look at the Native American languages. You could look at languages in the Far East, they bear no resemblance, and linguists can trace the development of language. We know that these languages did not evolve or originate from the Middle East. They originated where they are, which is exactly what we would expect. See if I have, let's see. Yeah, we have Egyptian hieroglyphs that were before the flood, while in the Middle East, they were writing in cuneiform. Yet that's not what took over. You see individual languages taking over in their respective areas exactly as modern science would suggest. So things that we know happen centuries apart, he has to try to squeeze them all together, and actually he's trying to squeeze like 4 billion years of history into 6,000 years. So anytime you do that, you're going to get lots of things happening, things that we know happen centuries apart, but he's got to try to say no, they happen basically at the same time. Yeah, I think we'll end there and we can go into the discussion.
Okay, there we go. James W., that's your rebuttal. I appreciate it. A couple minutes we can toss into the discussion. So we're moving along quickly and smoothly. Great debate so far. TRock, you now have your 8-minute rebuttal. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay. Normally, whenever I
did he do a rebuttal? I thought he did a rebuttal.
No, he just did his. So we went. James, you started.
Oh, right. You're right. Yeah, you're right.
No worries.
Go ahead, TRock.
All good.
I thought we were going to the open. Go ahead.
Okay. Normally, whenever I do engage with skeptics, their claim is that they adhere to a strict sense of science. Unfortunately, that's almost never the case. Usually what they do is very much what James has done here. He's kind of gone off onto some philosophical tangents and even some theological tangents, and some historical tangents, which I will grant can be classified as legitimate science. But I do think it's very striking. He asked the question in his intro. He said he likes to ask, if it wasn't true, the biblical account, would you want to know? The counter question to that is, if evolution is true, and particularly James' version of evolution, which is atheistic, I believe, and James, if I'm wrong, you can correct me on that. But anyway, if evolution is true, what difference does it make? Who cares? You can believe it or not believe it. Your fate is the same. So there is literally no impetus to believe it anyway. But I'm going to leave the philosophical stuff aside. What I think because he's covered a lot of different areas there. I won't have time to get into every single one of them. I think I'll just point out that the one that he should know the most about, because his position is supposed to be scientific and reason, is biology. He kept on talking about how speciation, rapid speciation cannot be the norm. Animals live where they live because they had to have evolved there. If you want to study actual science, one of the realities you're going to have to come to is that biology, mutation rates, that sort of thing, are directly tied to chemistry. And so before I get too big into that, I want to point out that when we say mutations, this is one of my big complaints about skeptics and their arguments, is they tend to just generalize everything in really broad strokes. And so I'm going to try and narrow some things down to point out that it's not science that he's arguing at all. When I think of mutations, I want to categorize them in two different ways. One of them is adaptations, which are deliberate, designed, forward-thinking changes, and the other one is mutations that are unwanted and unaccounted for. So mutations I would consider typically deleterious. They can be, what they like to call near neutral, which is basically just a kind of a backhanded way of saying, we can't really tell. Maybe they are deleterious, but we just don't notice. So we don't really know. So we'll just create this category called near neutral. In reality, tiny little speck of rust is near neutral on a car until you get 10 billion of them. Then they're not so neutral anymore. So anyway, two different types of changes in biodiversity. One is mutations. The other one is adaptations. So James, one of the things we know about adaptations is that epigenetics shows us that you can have some serious phylogenetic changes with no change in the genome. So when you say speciation doesn't happen fast normally, well, I would tend to agree, but we're also on the tail end of a long string of mutations. So certainly you're going to argue that mutations should be able to add up to build new things that didn't exist in the past. But in reality, you're stuck with basic chemistry. So for example, get an atom of lead in your food supply. Is that going to cause a deleterious mutation or a beneficial mutation? I'm going to suggest it'll cause a deleterious mutation. Now, that's an extreme example on purpose, but what if we're talking about salt? If you get too much salt in your food supply, is that going to cause problems, or is it going to cause benefits? It's going to cause problems. What if you get too little salt? Again, there's another health problem associated with too little salt. Too much protein, too little protein. Too much carbohydrates, too little carbohydrates. Every chemical has a balance for proper health, and just to get the chemicals that you do need out of balance cause serious problems. So how does that impact biodiversity? Well, when these animals get off the ark, we've got an empty planet basically. So one of the things that evolutionists have to come to grips with is that the food supply explains a whole lot about our planet, but the food supply, being primarily plant matter, has to replicate exponentially faster than the animals that consume it. So animal reproduction rates are exponential. So we typically think of populations as a doubling time, although it's just a mathematical convention. You can do it as a tripling time. You can do it as any quantified method you want, but we'll use doubling time. Plants, they reproduce exponentially faster than the exponentially fast reproducing animals. What that means is their doubling time is like way, way, way shorter. You don't need a degree in biology to know this. You can walk out to a cherry tree and see how many cherries, or walk out to an oak tree and see how many acorns fall off of an oak tree. They literally produce them by the thousands, and whereas animals typically only produce in small litters. 6, 8, 10 is a big litter for most animals. Some only 1 or 2 at a time. So anyway, biodiversity comes from animals radiating out in an empty environment where there's no competition among each other because the food source grows so fast. And so the other big impactor for basic biochemistry is climate. So in climate, you typically want to think about the water conditions and the temperature. And so water and temperature both have huge impacts on a broad range of materials that are non-biological in nature, and absolutely as well as materials that are biological in nature. So bottom line is, if you eat lead today, your offspring are going to pay the consequences for that. So mutations are basically the product of environmental changes and chemistry. And with the given reproduction rates that animals do have, 4,400 years, well, take humans, for example. We've got about 7.5, 8 billion people on the planet today. Anybody who knows anything about biology at all would normally, if they didn't already know, would normally say, why are there so few people on the planet today? If there were 8 people 4,400 years ago, why are there so few people on the planet today? And of course, we know the answer to that. There have been so many wars and so many catastrophes and several significant plagues like the bubonic plague. Point is, the animal world reproduces so fast that 4,400 years, like I've already stated, is trivial to get the number of species and the population sizes.
20 seconds.
And I will call it quits there, and we'll continue in the open discussion.
All right. Just on time. Gentlemen, great job on time so far, James W. and TRock. There we go. Okay, we're now moving into the open discussion. And to the audience, I am all caught up on all of your fantastic questions. As always, we're going to have an awesome audience Q&A. Okay, so the topic for tonight, Noah's Ark and Noah's Flood. TRock, you just ended with your eight-minute rebuttal. So James W., let's allow you to kick us off in this discussion portion. First couple points, first question, however you want to proceed. Go ahead.
TRock. So you talked about plants, and you talked about their reproduction rate versus animals. Based on your model or your understanding of the flood, what did God do about the plants? Because they weren't taken on the ark, and we knew they wouldn't survive being underwater for a year. So did God miraculously make it so they could survive underwater for that time, or did he poof and the earth just replanted itself after the flood was over? What's your understanding of that?
Okay, so the way you asked the question, I'll be honest with you, it just sounds like you have not read the text that you're arguing against. You said plants were not taken on the ark. They absolutely were. You can read that in the text.
For food, but
okay. What do you think seed is?
We need an entire earth full of flora and fauna. You're not going to be able to take enough plants on the ark to repopulate the world with plants.
How many plants do you need to take on the ark?
We've got trees that are 5,000 years old. They can corroborate with dendrochronology.
Okay, without chasing every little rabbit trail here, first let's back up. So the command was given to Noah to take every food that was eaten. Primarily, we're talking plant matter, right? So seeds, take some, grain, fruit, various vegetables, whatever. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say there were 2,000 different types of seeds that Noah had to take. A large part of it, of course, was part of their food supply so that they could last a year, right? Okay, so right out the gate, your argument was already incorrect. You've got tons and tons of seed on the ark. Now, as far as what's outside of the ark, it's really a skeptic's urban legend that no plants can survive outside the ark. That's completely untrue. Anybody who's ever seen a flood knows this. There are lots and lots of varieties of plants that what happens is their seed goes dormant in the ground, and only under certain conditions do they actually emerge and start to germinate. So that's one mechanism that brings plants back. Another one is vegetation typically floats from a flood. Not all of it, but a lot of it does. And so you can get, again, if you actually studied science, you would know that trees, for example, can be restarted from roots alone. A lot of trees you can just cut them all the way to the ground and they'll still turn around and come right back out from the roots that are left behind. So sorry, but your first two arguments are completely bogus.
Oh, I don't think so. And like I said, this is just like par for the course with these ad hoc explanations that are really they're really
what's ad hoc about? What's ad hoc about
the idea
that from the ground?
The idea that they could bring whatever left over that the animals didn't eat would be enough to repopulate the earth with plant life and have enough food for the herbivores to eat, and then have enough so that because remember the carnivores, because now all of a sudden they can eat meat, so all the herbivores are going to be dead within a month anyway. Of course, maybe they're going to be creating babies faster than maybe God's going to alter their biology so they can have babies faster. But it's very hard to see how you make it work, how you get to enough, how you get biodiversity. Creationist, what you guys don't understand is ecosystem.
Can you pause for a minute?
I'll pause for a second.
Okay, so you've been going for a little bit. You brought up several new points.
No, you went on for a little bit too. So
okay, so you seem to think it's incredulous that roots resprout themselves, that trees can regrow from roots, even though that's standard biology. Now you seem to think that it's incredulous that carnivores would. Uh-oh, I've got a little bit of a problem here. My battery is not charging on my laptop. I may end up with a problem here in a little while. If I do, I may have to switch computers, Donnie, so don't be terribly surprised. Anyway, as far as carnivores, kind of an interesting thing. There's not a single carnivore on land that cannot eat vegetable matter. Not a single one. Every one of them can. Now, we know that cats, some of the big cats, for example, are obligate carnivores. But that doesn't mean they always were. Today's obligate carnivores, and even those can eat. Well, there's two things that happen there. Just because they're obligate carnivores does not mean they can't eat plant matter. And fish is a viable food source as well for obligate carnivores. So anyway, interesting little one-off story. I literally personally witnessed a dog that liked to jump up and snatch pears out of a tree and eat them. And so your idea of somehow the carnivores are going to run around and kill off all the grazing animals, that's completely bogus. In the Ark account,
so the lions are going to survive on pears. That's their
is that what I said? Is that what I said?
Well, it seems to be what you're implying, that they would look at all these herbivores, and instead of eating those, because they're allowed to eat them now, right? Because after the flood, things can eat meat. But they're going to choose, so that they're going to say, well, if we just eat them all right now, then we won't have anything later. So we're just going to keep on eating vegetation.
Did I not point out that fish is a viable food source for carnivores?
Yeah, but
cats and bears are really good at catching fish.
Assuming that they're even by the ocean, that they even have access to.
So the world just got done flooding, and there's no ocean nearby.
Well, that's funny, because of course there's not enough water on Earth to. Since you brought that up, there's really not even enough water on Earth to flood over the mountains. Of course, you will say that, well, the mountains weren't there before, even though the Bible says that they were, even the high mountains. But that's kind of a new area that we didn't go into. But I do find it very incredulous that you're just willing to accept, because you've already assumed this to be true. So any explanation you can come up with must be reasonable about these animals and how they survived in a post-flood condition to get to today, because they had to, right?
That's interesting, because I am literally giving biological facts, and you are literally saying I am just kind of accepting random solutions. This is how real biology works.
Real biology does not say. Real biologists would never say that you could have two generic cats get off a Noah's Ark, and within 100 years you've got tigers, cheetahs, jaguars, bobcats, all those diverging that fast, because animals don't change just for fun. Evolution doesn't work that way. Evolution works, an animal has to adapt to its environment. That's why we find the animals where they are. They are highly suited for their environments. But you're saying they all got off at the same exact spot in the Middle East.
So that's interesting that you want to go down that line, talking about animals have to adapt to their environment. I've already pointed out that chemistry is a major factor in biodiversity. It's the food supply chemistry that I'm referring to in particular. So it is a well-established scientific fact. If a woman smokes while she's pregnant, the child suffers. If the woman eats healthy when she's pregnant, the child benefits. Sure. And the point there is the chemistry has an immediate impact. It's not 10,000 years later you finally develop some new skill or some new phenotypical trait. Chemistry acts instantly.
That's not going to cause the rapid type of macroevolution speciation that you would need to see based on this flood model. I mean, it's a valiant attempt. I will give it to you, but it really just doesn't do much for explaining the diversity when we have a wealth of information. We have a fossil record showing how these animals evolved. You're saying, no, that didn't happen. They all evolved within a couple hundred years after they got off of Noah's Ark.
So you can't talk about the chemical and biological mutation effect. So you're going to switch to the fossil record to find help. One of the examples I wanted to give, though, is, for example, you said it just cannot happen. And I'm telling you very plainly, chemistry and environment absolutely drives speciation. And so, for example, 2 cats get off the ark. 2 of them go north into the cold climate. 2 of them go south into the warm, dry climate. They've got 2 different chemistries and 2 different environmental temperature and what I talked about, the water, the amount of water that an organism gets. So you can also do this with plants. You can do it with anything, but plants is a real common one. Try and plant a garden. Try and plant a garden in 2 different soils under completely different circumstances. You can start with the same seed source at the beginning of the experiment, and you can absolutely watch the differences in the soil chemistry and the environment that you expose them to drive the directions that those plants change in just a few generations.
Right. So creationists, they feel very safe in the world of genetics and mutation rates because it's data driven at its core. It's data on paper. But when you actually go into the real world and see what that data would extrapolate to living creatures, that's where we get to the fossil record, where it's not conjecture. We have an actual record of how it happened in order. We don't have to say, well, maybe this mutation rate, maybe this type of mutation here. Thank you, God. But yeah, so that's why I go with the fossil record, because it's actual literal history of the Earth recorded in rock. And, speaking of flood, and we have geology, and we do have this fossil record, which is exactly not what you would expect from a worldwide flood, where you would expect the animals to be mixed in throughout the Earth, not in the same order, neatly in the same order all throughout the fossil record that we see.
I'm probably going to take that with a grain of salt, because earlier you were trying to tell me that they didn't have any plants on the ark and that plants can't survive a flood, even though I demonstrated quite reasonably that they can and they do. So I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. But the big error that you've made there is that you say we have this fossil record that shows us the history. The history is an interpretation. You don't have a different fossil record, quote unquote, than I have. We've all got the same fossils. We've all got the same geological strata. What I'm contradicting is not the hard science that we can see and measure today. What I'm contradicting is the interpretation given to it. Completely different thing. And so I've got something I want to share real quick. Donnie, I'm going to share my screen real quick, if that's okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Let me know when you can see my PowerPoint slide. Is it showing?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. I'm going to put this in reading view here. I want to go to this map right here because James brought up he's basically going into fossils and geology and that kind of thing. And this is not fossils, but this is geology. So this is just a modern elevation map of the U.S. And if you look at this little sidebar over here, I'll try and zoom that up a little bit. You can see what the color scale is. Dark green starts out at 0, going up to dark brown is the highest elevation. So here's the odd thing that whenever I was preparing for this debate, I kind of intuitively knew that the storytelling of evolution always trips up on itself. And so what we're seeing here is over in the Western U.S., at the higher elevation, the average elevation is much, much higher than on the eastern side of the United States. So here's the problem. Right through this middle strip right here is roughly where you find a whole lot of the dinosaur fossils that are supposedly, 65 plus million years old. The thing is, you find them right there at ground level at that elevation. Now scoot over here to this side in this little area. If you can see my mouse, I'm kind of going around, I believe that's Georgia and South Carolina there. Anyway, that is where allegedly, and I'm saying alleged, I'm sure it was, I'm not really contesting. I want to say it was Rhodocetus that was found there, some that's alleged to be 40 million years old, right in this area right here. Now, we've already got 25 plus million year discrepancy, but the older stuff has more erosion because there's 65 million years worth of erosion over this surface, leaving our fortuitous dinosaur fossil find, but 65 million years worth of erosion, and it's at the highest elevation in the country, while the lowest elevation places over here only have 40 million years of erosion. How does that work?
Plate tectonics.
So, okay,
Plate tectonics. That's how it works. I mean,
your
surface.
So
your
entertain
surface
this
is
for a minute for me, James.
it's a dynamic thing. It's not static. It's always changing, and surfaces are subducted and raised up, and that's why in fact, that's probably one of the reasons where this flood myth came from. Is they found evidence of sea life on mountains, so they concluded, well, this must have been underwater at some point, right? It must have been a big flood. No, it's just that what is a mountain today was underwater, was ocean crust millions of years ago. That's why we would get that. So different strata are visible at different parts of the world.
Yeah, so just for the record, plate tectonics, I'll accept that as an answer because, I would say the same thing. But here's the problem with your particular history that you're alleging has happened. 6,000 feet above sea level, 65 million years of erosion. Where did all that soil go? It did not go to the East Coast, apparently, because it's way below that elevation, and it's only had 40 million years worth of erosion. So where did all the erosion go?
Oh, the Earth's crust. It's a dynamic thing. Sediments are always eroding from some places, depositing on others. That's
so you can just pick and choose the rates that different areas lift up at.
Well, we look at, and we can use different techniques of radiometric dating to cross confirm, and then we can actually.
Geological uplift isn't something you'd use radiometric dating for. You would use geological formations to determine uplift.
Well, I think there's different ways that you could do it because, well, if you find life forms in the strata, you can date those using radiometric dating, and therefore you can tell when that ground deposit was on the surface, when that strata was surface
when it
level
was on the
strata.
surface.
Yeah.
Don't you think you should also correlate that with the erosion rates?
Right. If it eroded, it wouldn't be there to test now, would it? So, I mean,
Well, the standard response on that sort of thing. Why do you find dinosaur fossils at ground level, 6,000 feet above sea level?
Because it eroded. The ground eroded around those things. Like you can get a geographic, or you could get a map that'll actually tell you what area of the geological column is visible at every location on Earth. Sure. And it's different. Like Ken Hovind will say, oh, there's no geological column. Well, no, you can in one location find the entire geologic column, but you can find different pieces of it in different regions that are accessible. And we know, because we can cross-confirm these layers, and we do have this very glaring iridium layer that we know we see all over the world, and we know it's from the dinosaurs. So that is a perfect baseline to be able for us to date everything. And
okay, so
which also precludes a global flood.
So real quick, you want to cross confirm? Let's cross confirm something here. Donnie, is my slide showing again?
Yeah, I gave you the thumbs up, but realize you're probably on your slide. So yeah, you're good.
Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to pull in here, I'm not sure if I've embedded it as a link. I may have. Give me just a second. I can't remember exactly where I put this. I'm going to have to kind of take a guess here, but let's go to reading view real quick. No, not that. And I apologize. Like I said, I don't think I'm. Let me try this right here. So one of the things I did, this is not it, and I apologize. My computer crashed, just kind of got my files messed up here. But anyway, I'll make the point though, because anybody can go look at this and research it for themselves. So I was looking at what I was doing was a comparative elevation review for as it relates to the fossil record in whale evolution, actually. So what I found was. Okay. What I found was that Pachycetus, Ambulocetus, discovered in Pakistan, and I was looking at the elevation, and the elevation in the areas that they were found was somewhere on the order of 300. I think it ranged anywhere from 150 meters up to 350 meters above sea level or so. 350 meters, a little over 1,000 feet. Relatively low elevation, particularly when you compare it to that map I showed of the U.S., where half the country is way up there in the 4, 5, 6,000 foot above sea level range. So anyway, Ambulocetus, the Pachycetus both found it relatively low deals. And so I'm talking about this. Why is the older strata so high in elevation compared to the other stuff? Well, here's the problem. So Rhodocetus, 40 million years is what the textbooks say, and also found in Pakistan. But I was a little bit surprised. Rhodocetus was also found in the U.S., and it was found over in that eastern coast near in South Carolina, I believe, and Georgia, both. But either way, right over there on the coast at a relatively low. Now the problem is that Rhodocetus was a fully aquatic animal, so he had to have been underwater the whole time, which kind of makes my point. You've got dinosaur era strata, 65 plus million years, 6,000 feet above sea level. You have that water is so high between Pakistan and the eastern side of the U.S. The water level is too high to make sense for having a fully aquatic animal like Rhodocetus, and then also have the semi-aquatic animals at roughly the same elevation on the other side of the globe. How does that work?
Well, if you want to have a debate just on whale or cetacean evolution, I would be willing to do that, but I don't have all my whale evolution figures in front of me.
Fair enough, but I'm not talking about the evolution. I'm talking about the elevation and the sea level.
Whales, whether they be semi-aquatic, fully aquatic, wherever they were in their stage of evolution, they're certainly in and around water. I don't think it's too hard to imagine that they would be distributed pretty widely around the earth. I would have to look at each individual one of those species and see where all the specimens were found to be able to tell if that's a problem or not. I doubt that it will be, because the field of evolution has been going strong and is only going stronger. It's only accumulating more evidence. So I would be happy to look into it, but I'm pretty confident that there's a good explanation for whatever phenomenon you're proposing.
So yeah, this is just highlights one of my many complaints about the evolutionist and their arguments is they love to generalize so much. They love to say, oh, you can't have that many animals come off the ark and turn into it, and they generalize so much without actually looking at the details, like what I'm trying to get you to do today. And so this is just another example where you just kind of hand wave. And what it really points to is in a global flood, you're basically subject to real-time water movement, and gravity is 9.8 meters per second square, so water moves kind of fast. I also did some calculations on continental movement, which I think are really interesting. I need to bring that up here in a minute. But anyway, the point is, you guys tend to generalize things so much, but as soon as we start really drilling down to the detail and saying, okay, what elevation? When you say, for example, dinosaurs are always found above the Cambrian strata. No, the dinosaurs in the U.S. are 6,000 feet above sea level, and their younger counterparts are only a couple hundred or less than 1,000 feet above sea level. And Cambrian strata, it's also found at at higher elevations over there on the western half of the U.S. as well. So what exactly does above mean? You got to put that in a real geological context. Sea level, height above sea level, depth below ground surface, those things count. So it's extremely, I find it extremely misleading to say that fossils are only found above this and only found above that, because as soon as you look at the elevation, that's completely not true.
Well, I think it's very misleading also, because on one side, you're very, very skeptical about the theory of evolution. I'm assuming you're a young Earth creationist. You do not subscribe to the theory of evolution. Am I right?
That is correct. I do not at all subscribe to the theory of evolution.
But when you need to use it, because you have this ark and you've got these animals on there, and you can't have millions of species on there, you need to cut that down dramatically. So you're willing to use evolution when it's convenient, and then use it only for a little while, because we don't see animals changing anywhere near this rate today on any type of scale. You might be able to point to one or two examples where there's been rapid speciation, but you would need that over the whole world, and there's just no model for that. We've never seen anything like that happen in the fossil record. We've never witnessed anything like that happening, but you're just willing to accept it because you need it. You need it because you can't have millions of animals on the ark. So you need to have that rapid speciation, because all these animals were in their present form almost as soon as they walked off the ark. And but these changes don't happen randomly or through chemistry. I'm really not sure. Natural selection works on these species, and that's the driving force behind evolution. Sure, there probably is a chemical component to it, because DNA is a chemical and it's subject to chemical reactions, but natural selection drives evolution.
So let's back up for a minute. You said I'm happy to invoke evolution when I need it. You're very clearly equivocating here. Speciation does not equate to macroevolution, where microbial agents can change over millions of years until they become people. It's two entirely different things. So no, I do not accept your version of evolution at all. There is a real speciation thing that happens. And as I pointed out, epigenetics is part of it, environment is part of it, and chemistry is part of it. And the reason it does not equate to macroevolution in the sense that you think of evolution, the reason it does not is because there are real world coordinated changes, systematic changes that have to happen in coordinated fashion. In engineering, we call it systems integration. And what that means in practical terms is, if you're looking at dinosaur to bird evolution, for example, it's real easy to point at the tail and the snout and all that, and say, look how that just morphed from the dinosaur version, the theropod version, into the modern bird. That's real easy to do, but what you cannot do from the fossil record is you cannot demonstrate how birds have a global sense of navigation. Lizards do not. Almost certainly dinosaurs don't either. So that part in their neural complex has to evolve. It has to be a coordinated change. You also have to have a bellows lungs or reptilian style lungs turn into avian lungs, completely different systems. The heart has to change. The way they synthesize energy in their muscles has to change. The scales do not evolve into feathers. We know that from modern experiments. People like to throw out some of these ones and pretend that they do, but they don't. Anyway, the point is, so many different changes all have to happen simultaneously. They all have to function. They all have to survive to the next generation. And the randomness of soil chemistry alone in the food source says that absolutely would not happen.
So they don't have to all evolve simultaneously. We have millions of years between dinosaurs and modern birds. I know a lot of creationists, they like to talk about birds and say that, oh, there were fully modern birds. But they weren't modern birds. They may have superficially looked like modern birds, I guess. Therefore, creationists are going to say there are modern birds. But we have plenty of time for these evolutionary mechanisms to take place. And they don't have to happen simultaneously. That's the irreducible complexity argument, which has been thoroughly discredited.
No, you're equivocating.
That's the irreducible
complexity. It is
complexity.
not the irreducible complexity argument. That is not what it is. It's called systems integration. It's completely different than irreducible.
It's the same principle that they all have to evolve at the same time, or otherwise it's not functional, right?
No, it's not. It is not the same argument.
So why do they all have to evolve at the same time?
Because they all have to work. What good are wings on a dinosaur? What good are feathers on a dinosaur that can't fly and can't use his arms to reach out and grab things? Huh?
That's irreducible complexity. You're just calling it something different.
They have to integrate. They have to integrate into its neural system somehow. It's not. It's not the. It may be a subtle difference and one that you don't grasp, but it's a completely different argument. The bottom line is you can't just have features randomly start appearing that are totally useless, because your version of natural selection would instantly eliminate them, because they are
not necessarily.
Whenever you talk to the professional evolutionists, the idea is that you're wasting energy on something you can't get a benefit out of.
Right.
Therefore, natural selection removes it.
That is why we would tend to lose neutral traits that might not be deleterious, which actually kind of takes a dig at one of the genetic entropy arguments that creationists are so fond of, as a way to screen out some of these mutations that are not necessarily deleterious. But so dinosaurs, the feathered dinosaurs, no, you're right. They were not used for flight at first, but that doesn't mean they couldn't have been used for communication, through mating displays, for warmth. It's the irreducible complexity argument. It's the same argument Michael Behe brought into court about the bacterial flagellum. Oh, you need all the parts there. It doesn't work. Well, each part on its own can still confer a benefit, even if it's very slight.
Well, the problem is when you actually start analyzing
each other.
The problem is when you actually start analyzing those supposed benefits, they're really not. They're a detriment. You said that feathers, for example, could be used to communicate, or they could be used for warmth. Actually, the reverse is true. You do not want an animal out in the weather getting sopping wet in the cold whenever their internal organs do not survive cold weather well. It does the exact opposite of what you think it does. It also slows them down. It also prevents them from being able to procure food if they are, carnivorous in nature. It causes all kinds of problems.
Well, obviously it didn't, because feathers took over. Feathers pervaded. So if it was that harmful to the creatures, if it was that deleterious, they would have gone out of the gene pool. But we saw the opposite happen. We saw feathers start in dinosaurs before there were birds. And then we see feathers today in birds, which are a subset of dinosaurs. I know you don't agree with that. I know you think like birds were a special creation, but the evidence shows that feathers started in dinosaurs, and they are modified scales, even if we don't know perhaps the exact mechanism that evolution took to turn the scale into a feather.
I think that's one of those things we could actually do a little more thorough analysis of. Line me up the genetic sequence that produces scales and then line me up the genetic sequence that produces feathers. And I think what we're going to see is the dissimilarity is so great that there is no reasonable way. There's a thing called the waiting time problem, where you can't let point mutations be your mechanism to get from point A to point B in an evolutionary progression, because they take so long to distribute and settle in the population.
Well, and see, this is like what I was saying before, where we have theory and we have conjecture and we have interpretation, and then we have what actually happened in the fossil record. I know you're going to say, well, that's an interpretation too, but it's one that seems to be shared among the overwhelming majority of people who have studied the field, that show the development of feathers beginning in dinosaurs, pervading into birds.
So that,
and before you respond, TRock, TRock, I do want to make sure you have ample time to respond. Maybe after this topic here, we'll make sure in the last, let me see, in the last little bit of the discussion portion, let's just make sure we're hitting each point on Noah's Ark and Noah's flood that were brought up.
Okay, that's fine. We can go back.
Okay. Go ahead, gentlemen. You're doing great, by the way. We've got a fantastic audience, and the audience is very lively. So, it's been a great debate. Go ahead, gentlemen.
So I just wanted to kind of run back on something James just said about this history that's supposedly apparent in the geology of the world. James, do you think you could pull up a cross section, like a real a real photo, not a drawing, a real photo cross section of some geologic strata, and show me where the time is apparent in that cross section?
I don't think you could show that in a picture, the time. I think.
Well, the point is that you could explain step by step how this sequence stacks up to a deep time history.
Would I be qualified to explain that to you? Probably not. I'm not. I don't have a degree in geology, but I would refer you to people who do have more study in the field of geology. But that's not my any area that I've spent a lot of time looking into.
Good enough. Per Donnie's request, let's kind of steer back towards the Ark a little bit and
sure,
some of that, because one of the things I'm doing here is pointing out that the alternative is it really is absurd. And the claims made against the Ark are they avoid specific scientific detail. They're just hand waving generalizations and don't actually address the specifics of science. And when we do address the specifics of science, the Ark account becomes highly feasible. I don't know. You can tell me which part of the Ark itself, or we've already gone over the biology. You've kind of shown that you don't understand how plants are preserved. You've kind of understood.
I don't think it works globally.
Yeah, I know. We've heard a lot of claims like that, but do you have any actual science that shows it doesn't work globally?
I've never heard anybody make that claim before, that they could have just brought enough seeds with them on the Ark, and that the plants just could have survived on land because they just could have. That's a completely new claim to me. I've never heard anybody make that claim before.
Yeah,
it strikes me as very incredulous. I'm very incredulous to it, but I've never heard anybody make it before.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a professional scientist or an academic of any sort, because I'm not. But I do have some really good real world experience with things that are very closely related to these ideas. So here lately, I've been running a business mowing yards, and I've also owned a tree trimming business. And I can tell you that if you do not mow your yard for 3 months, you are going to have huge problems, because plants really do grow that fast. They really do. As a matter of fact, I just went out and did a job here the other day for a lady. All I was doing was cleaning out her flower bed. And do you know how many oak trees had seeded themselves in her flower bed just since last fall? I was cleaning her flower beds last year for her, had them all cleaned up. They were very nice. I put thick mulch down, did all that kind of good stuff. Went back this summer. She didn't call me for the first several weeks of the season. And then when she finally called me, I went out there, and she had little baby oak trees with full broad leaves
I had a feeling that was coming soon because I could tell he was kind of glitching in and out. He warned us a little while ago, James, that his computer was dying as his laptop wasn't charging. So he'll be back in.
We'll give him a minute to come back.
Yeah, we'll give him a minute, and during that minute, we'll give you, James, a minute break. You know, you guys have been going at it nonstop now for almost an hour and a half. So let me go over some reminders.
It's been fun.
It's been fun. It's been a fun night, guys. And as always, our audience is engaged in the debate, and I am actually a little more engaged in the live chat than I usually am. That's probably the nature of double header nights, where you've had one too many coffees throughout the night. So again, guys, reminder: this is the first of many double header nights, and the first debate at 8:00 was between Kent and Snake Was Right. That was a ton of fun. So if you have not yet seen that one, please do check it out. And currently we are debating Noah's Flood and Noah's Ark between TRock and James W. I've got a ton of audience questions as well. So pretty soon, as we wind down the discussion, we're going to get to some of those. So
you don't want to see Donnie when he's had too much coffee, huh? Things get a little crazy over there.
I think that was probably a coffee ago. That was too much coffee. So T-Rock was back, but he just wanted to give us a teaser. So that was the T-Rock teaser, and we'll give him another
he should be back momentarily.
30 seconds. He should be back.
Oh, do we have a new date for that debate, Donnie?
We do. We do. So this one is all set and rescheduled. This one is tomorrow night. So 4 debates in 3 nights. Tomorrow, Atheist Jr. and Kent Hovind.
That will be a debate to watch.
Yes.
That will be a great debate. I can't wait to see that one.
Best buds for life are going to be duking it out. So that'll be one to remember. Doki Doki Bible Club, brother. Appreciate it. Doki says, I love your shirt. James and T-Rock. Looks like we got you back in, which means, I believe.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me speak?
Break time is over. Yes.
Am I coming in clear?
You are loud and clear.
I apologize. I will not probably have a camera connected. I'm not sure if I can do that simultaneously on this particular computer. So I'll have to finish out like this, I think. Anyway, the argument I was making was that in the flood model, plants absolutely can come back, repopulate extremely fast. Seeds get buried in the earth. In a matter of months, you've got trees popping up everywhere. And so also, James, it's worth noting, trees can basically be broken into a variety, kind of like at the family level, but you've got like the conifers, and then you've got the nut trees, and you've got the fruit trees and all that kind of stuff. Nut trees like oak trees, for example, hickory, pecan, that kind of thing. Those nuts tend to fall down. They get buried, and animals do it too, but they get buried into the ground. They stay dormant for a period of time, and then whenever the temperature and the water conditions are right, they come out. And so that is exactly what the flood describes. There's a year-long period there. There's actually, I said since last fall, this lady that I was working for had all these trees come up. And I do mean dozens in a relatively small area. In the flood account, you've got 150 days of water going up, 170 days of water going down. So not every square inch of land is underwater for that 370 days or so. And that 170 days is less time than the time between last year when I cleaned that lady's flower bed and this year. And so nothing unusual whatsoever about a dove coming off the ark and finding an olive leaf and bringing it back to the ark. It is absolutely what you would expect in that time frame.
You don't think the large amounts of salt that would have been deposited on the ground would be any type of impediment to plant life returning
I'm sorry,
very
but
rapidly, as you suggest.
what large amounts of salt? How much salt do you think there was?
Well, we see salt flats. We know that there's that come from water when salt water does leave salt deposits in an area after it evaporates. There would be a
Okay.
lot of salt on the land.
Okay. Salt doesn't have to be everywhere. When soil gets turned over, it's not instantly permeated with salt from the ocean, for one thing. For another thing, salinity increases over time. Another way you know the Earth is not billions of years old, salinity of the ocean increases over time. So the expectation is 4,400 years ago, the salinity content of the ocean was less than it is today.
Sure.
Whenever the sun shines on and warms the ocean, it evaporates, and that's actually a distillation process where only water comes up without the salt. And the salt gets its ocean from that fresh water falling back to the earth, rolling across the ground, and carrying the what am I looking for? Sodium and potassium, those types of salts, back into the ocean. So it's you're kind of reaching to suggest that it was too salty for this, too salty for that. Bottom line
Well,
is you don't know what the pre-flood world was like, neither do I. You don't know what the ocean was like 4,400 years ago. Nobody can measure that. And
you're just assuming that the conditions were ideal, like that. You need to have all these assumptions that everything was ideal, that a lot of plants survived under the water through, maybe the roots survived and they came back, and you just need everything to happen perfectly.
Okay. No, actually, James, if you was paying attention, what I did was gave several reasonable mechanisms
They would
that
all
preserve
have to
plant
work
life. And
optimally.
no, they don't. Any one of them would probably be sufficient by itself. But I gave several reasonable mechanisms. They
I don't
carried
think any one
seed
of them
on the
would have been.
ark. And so I'm talking about oak trees a lot. Acorns are a food source. So they take acorns from oak trees onto the ark. They also get submerged in the ground so they can sprout back up there. The roots can also come back. Every one of these is very common standard biology. There's no reaching, there's no wild imagination. It's not like you have to have this perfect thing every single time, because it happens, the situation that's happening on one side of the planet is different than on the other. So maybe no oak trees were growing where Asia is now, but they were where North America is now. Not an issue. Totally not an issue. It is pretty much a given that an oak tree can find a place to regrow somewhere on the earth, and they reproduce exponentially fast.
We've hit that one a couple of times. I don't think we're going to come to a consensus on that one. Let me talk about the animals in your model. So
Okay.
you talked a little bit before about these animals getting off the ark, and then maybe the carnivores chose to eat vegetation for a while to give the herbivores time to rebuild their population up. And but how do you get in your model things like kangaroos only being found in Australia, certain animals only being found in the area where evolution says that they evolved, and nowhere else?
No, that's a great question. It's very fair. The problem is in the question itself, though. You're assuming something behind that question, and I think what you're assuming is that we should have kangaroo fossils around the world post flood, because in our model they should have lived just about anywhere and everywhere, and so we should find kangaroo fossils around the world. Is that kind of what you think?
We should at least see them in the Middle East, and assuming they migrated to Australia, we should at least see them. We should see everything in the Middle East around Mount Ararat, because that's where everything started in your model.
Because you think right after they got off the flood there would be another catastrophe that rapidly buried them.
Well, over
that's
kind
of what it takes to get those kinds of fossils. You got to have some kind of rapid burial to get fossils. If you don't have
over
rapid
time,
burial,
you would expect to see some. You would expect to see. You may not find all of them, but you would expect to see some.
No, that's what I'm telling you. Your fallacy is that exact assumption. You would not expect to see the fossils anywhere. Now, I will readily admit that I personally have not seen what evolutionists consider valid kangaroo fossils out of Australia. I have not seen that. I would like to see them, because there are two events in a creationist model. There are two basic events that we might associate with those fossils. One is the flood. The other one is the ice age. Now, I think by default, most evolutionists assume that we have to associate kangaroo fossils in Australia with the flood, but we don't. What we need to do is review the geological strata in which they're found and make a determination of which one is more likely. But it is an absolute fallacy on your part to assume that in 4,400 years' time, we should see kangaroo fossils anywhere. Period.
Well, it's what we would.
Because
I get it. We don't, but
I mean, to put a finer point on it, so talk about trees and fossils. We'll talk about animals and fossils. So a snake died in my yard. You know how long it lasted? I did not touch it. I left it there. It lasted about 4 or 5 weeks, maybe, and it was completely gone. There's no fossil. I live in Oklahoma. Is my environment here radically different than what you think you might have seen in the Middle East? In Mount Ararat at elevation, it is different, I'll grant it, but not radically. But there, it would probably disappear even faster, just because it's, if you're in a mountainous area, erosion actually operates faster on more inclined surfaces than it does on flat surfaces. So I wouldn't expect it to last there long either. But the point is, 4 or 5 weeks for a snake fossil. I've got a tree in my yard. The stump got knocked over. It was a green tree at the time it was cut down. The stump got knocked over shortly after. You know how long it lasted? About 5 years. And it's still out there. It is, but the problem is it is like dust and spongy mess now. It doesn't last very long. So why do you think kangaroo fossils would last 4,400 years in Mount Ararat? I don't know.
Well, I would be willing to bet whatever that snake was, whatever species it was, that one did not fossilize. But I would be willing to bet you would find fossilized examples of that snake right around your area. So 1,000 years from now, they could look in that area and they'd be able to tell that that snake lived where you live roughly about the same time.
That's
right?
funny you should say that, because you know what? We are talking about a global flood, and that means every square inch of Earth was underwater at some time. I do live in Oklahoma, and guess what? I can find marine fossils all over the place in my neighborhood. So by your comments, 4,400 years ago,
going right through the center of the country about, what was that, about 12 to 15,000 years ago, that whole area was underwater.
Not this particular
the
area.
Internal Seaway.
The internal seaway was further west. I know what you're talking about. It was further west from here. Actually, in your paradigm, I want to say they give some. I don't remember what it is. 100 million years ago, that a large part of the U.S. was underwater. But by your comments, I've got these marine fossils here in Oklahoma, not at the interior seaway. Why are they here? Why haven't they eroded away? They're below elevation from the western half of the U.S. Why isn't everything eroding from the east to the west and just either burying it or by water drainage just wiping it away?
Well, I'd have to see exactly where you're at and see exactly the different maps of the interior seaways that have been there, and it's to be able to tell if that area was underwater or when it was last underwater, because I think it's probably in 4 billion years, every part of the crust has been underwater for a considerable time at one point or another. I think that just makes perfect sense. Or the crust that makes up your area could have been uplifted. I don't know the geology of your area where you live, but it's no problem. I would be more than happy to take a look at that. But Donnie, what you said before.
Hold that. I'll let you talk. I just want to show you something real quick. You can talk while I'm showing you this. I'm gonna, Donnie. I'm trying to share my screen, and James is free to talk. But I just want to pull this up here, and
yeah, if you want to share your screen, just let me know.
Let me know whenever let me know when you can see my Cretaceous tertiary screen.
It's shared now. It's just on the StreamYard.
Okay, go ahead, James. I'll carry on this.
Well, what you said before about, so I guess you're saying all the kangaroo fossils came from the flood. So is it your
That's
contention
not what I
that,
said. That's not what I said.
okay, it's what it sounded like, but is it your contention that the kangaroos lived in Australia before the flood? Two of them migrated to the Middle East, had the flood, and then they migrated back to that area after the flood? Is that what you're saying? And that's why
No,
we only see them there?
that's not what I'm
I
saying.
Well,
I mean,
that's
I've
what it
heard
sounded
that
like you
kind
were
of.
saying.
Yeah, I've heard that kind of reasoning before, and no, that's kind of an idea that skeptics impose on creationists. That's not even
T-Rock,
realistic. I'll tell you what my personal take is. My personal take is
T-Rock. I'm
I
just gonna.
know
I'm
where
gonna.
kangaroos lived pre-flood, and I suspect, again, I've already said I do not really enough with the specific fossil finds and the geology of
He's
the area.
roboting. I can't hear him.
T-Rock, I'm gonna jump in, brother. I think you need to stop sharing your screen because it's taking too much
Can you hear me?
bandwidth, and you've completely
Hear
started a
you better.
robot.
Hold on, I'll see if I can fix it real quick.
You just have to
I know
click
it's probably
the. If you just click the stop screen share, you should be good because it didn't start roboting until you started to screen share,
I'm
brother.
gonna get out again and get back in because I think my mistake was being on
You're gonna get
Firefox.
out and okay, sounds good. Sounds good. So as T-Rock does that, I do want to let the audience know that I've got all of the questions and super chats saved, so I am all caught up and good to go. So when T-Rock gets back, what we'll do, James, you and T-Rock had a very engaging discussion, and the timer did go off a little bit a few minutes ago. I gave you guys a 5-minute warning at the bottom
Yeah, I
there.
saw it.
So this might be, a good place to kind of wind down and get into some closing statements. As I got to say, time has flown by, hour and 45 minutes.
It certainly has.
Been a very comprehensive debate. So what we'll do as we wait for T-Rock here is let everybody know that we've got more of James W. in July.
Woo-hoo!
So you've been a busy man there, James. The hominid fossil record, Kent, and James W.
Human evolution. Baby.
Human evolution. Although this is a more specific debate, they have debated twice before on evolution, and those prior debates were more the bigger
General,
picture, multiple topic kind of debates. This one will be more hyper specific. I'm looking forward to it.
Kent can have all his slides ready to go. He'll be super pumped.
It'll be worth the wait. Chapter 3. So the end of a trilogy. T-Rock, good to have you back. I was just letting James know that that's a good time to move into closing statements anyways, as we've had lots of open discussion there, and very good back and forth, very engaging. We do have a ton of audience questions though, so I do want to make sure we have time to address those and engage those as well. So, okay, James W., you started, so let's give you the 5-minute closing statement first, then the same for T-Rock. Actually, before you do, T-Rock, I just want to make sure your audio is improved. My good man, did you want to give us a test?
Okay, yeah, I'm not attempting to screen share anything. Hopefully I'm coming through good.
Yes, sounds good.
Okay, good.
So, okay. Go ahead, James W., 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Sure. Just let me know when I'm about at a minute. And so I want to thank Donnie for having me back on the channel. I want to thank T-Rock for the engaging conversation. And this topic is so big, and there are so many points and areas that we didn't get to touch on, and that's unfortunate, but that's just the nature when you're tackling something that's really big like this, and you want to try to get all your points in, and you're just inevitably not going to be able to do that just because of the nature of the topic. But yeah, global flood, I don't think it happened. I don't think it's reasonable. I know he's proposed some explanations for some of the things that I have, some of the difficulties that there are with the global flood, and I guess they resolve it for him and he's happy with it. But it doesn't really resolve it for me or for anybody who has, or anybody at least who's an expert who, the scientific community nearly unanimously rejects flood geology. They reject special creation. So I'll leave that at that. But what I did want to touch on is what we didn't really get to touch very much on was the history, the fact that cultures all throughout the world have contiguous history that goes from today through the flood, before the flood, and their cultures are intact and the same. You could trace back their languages, their writing systems, their culture. It goes from today, goes right through the flood, before the flood, and apparently they didn't notice that they were all drowned and were all underwater. And the biblical authors, they didn't know about any of this. They didn't know about people, the Native Americans. They didn't know about people in the Far East. They had no idea about any of that. So they were just doing the best that they could with the information they had available to them. And take it for what it is, for the culture, for the literary value, for the history of, does give us an idea of the history of where the Hebrew people were at that time in their evolution as a culture, the stories they were telling, the mythologies that they had. That's really all that it is. And we see similar things in other cultures. And yeah, the Hebrews, they highly adapted it to their culture, to their one God. They did change a lot of those things, and they were very zealous in trying to keep their scriptures contiguous and pure. We know that they took that very seriously, but that doesn't mean that it's true. That's the thing that I would say. It doesn't mean that it's literal, actual history, because we have literal, actual history. We have history of Egypt, goes right through the flood. We have Native Americans building struck, goes right through the flood. And if you look at the timelines that they're proposing for population, they actually have two different formulas that they use. One population chart to get to today with 8 people getting off the ark. How do you get to 7 billion today? And they have a completely different formula to get enough people on the earth to be building pyramids and inhabiting large cities in near record time after the flood. And the problem is, when you combine both of them together, it doesn't work. We would have hundreds of billions of people on the planet today. So similar with the animals, they're invoking a special period where everything happened extremely rapidly and then stopped, and then we just have what we see today. And another thing that I think that they're missing, that they don't understand very well, is
1 minute.
Animals they don't live by themselves. Animals live in ecosystems, and ecosystems are complicated and interdependent and very fragile. The idea that you could have all the animals on the earth live inhabiting one area in the Middle East for any amount of time is how would a functioning ecosystem work? It really doesn't. When we don't see anything like that happening today, animals have their niches. They survive in certain areas. They depend on certain other animals, and that took a long time to develop. And that's why when you have invasive species, when you have changes to the ecosystem, it really, really causes a lot of problems for the animals. And then it requires human intervention to try to save that ecosystem from collapse. You would have had that in a global scale. What did the snakes eat before they could eat? Because not only are obligate carnivores, but snakes they can't eat vegetation, just flat out. They can't eat it. What did a snake curl up to an apple and then swallow the apple whole? It doesn't work. And that mechanism of changing to being able to eat vegetation to be eating live animals would have taken a lot longer than a few thousand years to develop. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. Thank you, guys.
Okay, James, thank you so much for that roughly 5-minute closing statement. TRock, we now have your closing statement whenever you're ready. Go ahead.
Okay, I think the tone of this debate was James just does not follow real world science. That was kind of the overall theme here. The two pieces that I kind of wanted to address that he just now talked about, though, and I would have liked to have carried this on the languages. James, ancient languages actually reveal flood detail. Chinese language is a case in point that I'm most familiar with. Um, some of their ancient Chinese script and artifacts both. There's I want to say it's bronze, but there was a statue that was found of a tree with a serpent and a piece of fruit hanging from it, and this is several thousand years old. I say several, 2-3 thousand, I think. I'm not sure the exact age, but anyway, ancient languages reveal details that correspond with the biblical account of creation and the flood both. So that's not really. I mean, we could do a whole separate deal on that alone, I think. But and I'm more than happy to do that. The other big point you tried to make was animal populations don't diversify today. Yeah, I think you're kind of implying they're somewhat static, and so this rapid speciation that we invoke could not have happened because it's not what we see today. I don't think you want to go with the argument that that's not what we see today, because nothing about evolution, macroevolution, is something we see today. And we can go well beyond evolution, planetary formation, star formation. None of that do we see today, and nor does it happen in nature by itself. But another big thing in this whole conversation has been presupposing the most unrealistic versions and details. I don't. It's just bizarre to me that you can't kind of nail down some very common sense ways of thinking about things. Snakes eating apples. I already pointed out that fish was a viable food source. What I did not point out, but you could easily deduce this on your own, insects are another viable food source. And so I don't have to imagine snakes eating apples or any kind of fruit or grain or anything else. They can eat insects, which a lot of snakes do. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of snakes that are strictly insectivores, and they can also eat fish. A lot of snakes do that too. So anyway, that's kind of the tone of the debate. Is James is not actually following a reasoned scientific rebuttal. He's following much more of a philosophical. I think that's incredible. I don't think that can happen kind of line. But anyway, I'll stop there. It was a good conversation. I really do appreciate James participating. I think it does a really good job at showing the strength of the biblical creationist position. And again, I always like to thank you, Donnie, for hosting this, and thank the audience for their participation. It is, after all, the audience that we do these things for. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you, TRock, for that closing statement. And James W. as well. If you guys love what you're seeing from these debaters, the relevant links are in the description box, okay, for James W. and TRock. Again, to the debaters, I do appreciate you guys keeping this topic so fun, so engaging. You know, this is definitely a rewatchable debate. And also to the audience, I'd appreciate some feedback on tonight's doubleheader. We've pretty much been streaming all night since 8 p.m. Kent Hovind and Snake was right. That was a ton of fun. And TRock versus James W. Overall, we've had debates on transitional fossils and Noah's flood and Noah's Ark tonight. So if you guys like the double headers, let me know. You know, leave me your feedback, and I'll make sure we get some more of these for the summer, because as I've said, it's the summer of debates. Okay, let's get right into some of these fantastic questions that have come in. And as always, gentlemen, James and TRock, you're both no stranger to this platform, so you know how we roll on the Q&A portion, whoever the question is for, in order that we can move along smoothly. We'll just make sure they get the last word. So, okay, question that came in all the way at the beginning from Power Word. And question, I believe, is for you, James. So, okay, let's check this out. Wouldn't these macro changes over long periods of time have to actually happen within a single generation. Your ancestor, the Neander monkey man, would have to birth a human, right? Question
Right.
for you,
And
James.
so that's quite possibly like one of the worst straw man of evolution I've ever seen. And I've seen some bad ones, but that's a really good effort at straw manning evolution. But um, what I try to explain to people on this, it's just like how languages evolve. Okay, where you have a language like Latin, then you have French, Spanish, Italian, you have all these languages that sprouted from Latin. There was no point where a Latin speaking parent gave birth to an Italian speaking child. That never happened. It always happens through very slow incremental changes to the point where it would be very difficult to pick the exact point where one species breaks off from the other, because species are arbitrary constructs. They're not actual things in the real world. A species is it's a man-made description of it. The reality is things are just out there having babies. If they're genetically close enough, they can have fertile offspring, and that's what we call a species. But it it isn't anything that the natural world is concerned with. It's just our interpretation of it. But no, they don't have to happen right away. And there was no point where it would be very difficult to draw an exact point where humans, where you had the Homo break off from the Australopithecines, which is our direct ancestor, but impossible to pinpoint exactly where that happened. It'd be arbitrary.
All right. Thank you, James, for the response. Power word, thank you for the question. And TRock, the floor is yours for your response.
Okay, I'll try and be quick here. I want to directly address the question that's put forth. And I'm really only going to focus on the first part of that question. Wouldn't these macro changes over long periods of time have to actually happen within a single generation? In short, yes, they do, and it's because the environment does not take tens of thousands of years to change extremely slowly at 1 degree per 100 years or something like that. Organisms have to survive today. They have to have their offspring today. They have to adapt to the environmental changes today. They cannot afford to wait. So yes, they have to happen quickly. And the other part of my response has to do with James' response. He said that he wants to compare language development to evolution. It's a really bad analogy. Language is intelligently constructed, and people have invented languages overnight. Evolution is completely random, unguided, strictly the course of natural processes. And like I said, it's in direct conflict with how biology actually works because, yes, the organisms have to survive today.
TRock, appreciate it. James W., the question was for you. Get the last word.
So no, languages, you can construct a language intelligently, but know that most of them were not constructed that way. Most of them came naturally, and most of the changes to them are also not intelligent. It happens by people using language and using the words that they want. New words coming up. It's not like we all get together and have a big meeting and say, okay, we're going to start using this word, or we're going to bring this word from a foreign language. You may do that with it's typically the people who write the dictionaries following society and the way that people are using the language, not the other way around. It's not like there's a committee and they're dictating how we have to speak. No, it goes the other way around. But no, evolution doesn't. You don't have to have all that way. You might have a situation where most of the animals are wiped out because they don't have that mutation. They will not survive. It's about making the next generation just a little bit more able to survive. Maybe 99% of them are wiped out, and only 1% of them are able to survive. And the genetics build off that one who is able to survive. And maybe most of their offspring aren't able to survive, but this is how the process works.
Okay, appreciate the questioner, and I also appreciate the the answers. Okay, let's see what question we can get up here next. Okay, here's a question that comes in from Cool Jesus. This one's for you, TRock. So he asks, if I remember, TRock does not have a firm flood boundary, but in every view, and he lists a couple flood boundaries here: Pleistocene, KPG, pterosaurs are extinct. So regardless of the view, pterosaurs are extinct. Why and how did 85 genera of pterosaurs go extinct?
Okay, no, this is a good question. Does not have a firm flood boundary. If by firm flood boundary you mean one that identifies with one of the named common geological eras, no, I don't have a firm flood boundary, but I do have a firm flood boundary because I'm not equating it to that. I'm equating it to what's under your feet, whether you can deduce that it was the workings of an ice age, a local catastrophe, or the flood, or your basically your three options. And that's just different all over the place. It should not be equated to the so-called textbook geological column. But then he says, but in every view, someone said pterosaurs are extinct. Yes. Why and how did 85 genera of pterosaurs go extinct? So genera and family both are close to the concept of a biblical kind. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that 85 genera actually come from one biblical kind. Why and how did they go extinct? Well, Noah would have brought two of every kind on the ark. There would have been pterosaurs on the ark. And how did they go extinct? I believe, from what we can tell from history and from cave depictions and things like that, that they apparently have been hunted to extinction, along with the combination of climate changing over the past 4,400 years. We've had an ice age. Pterosaurs don't do well in an ice age. After the ice age, you get a lot of erosion, a lot of kind of crazy things happen. And then, of course, as people are spreading out across the continent, we do actually have some historic accounts that render something like a pterosaur, and we've got some cave paintings that and some written pieces of history that kind of indicate that people have seen pterosaurs in more modern times. And so my answer is they probably have mostly been hunted and victims of changing climates.
Thank you, TRock. And James W., if you had anything to add, go ahead.
Well, sure. Of course, he doesn't have a firm flood boundary. Of course, we can't get a standardized definition of a kind, because as soon as they would put forward a definition of these things, then science could pick it apart and show how it doesn't work. So they're very, very vague and nebulous about these terms that they use, because anytime they've gone before and put forward models, it's unworkable. Science picks it apart, and then they have to go home and come up with another model. I mean, he's saying that there were dinosaurs on board the ark. I mean, doesn't it seem silly that we know today that 99% of the species that ever existed are not alive today, yet they were all alive in 6,000 years? It seemed like if God was trying to save all these animals, he did a really bad job, because as soon as they got off the ark, within a few generations, 99% of them went extinct. He should just let them drown with all the babies and all the animals who didn't do anything anyway. Yeah.
Okay, and TRock, you get the last word. Question was for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's chalk James' response up to arguments that evolutionists absolutely should not use. What did he say? Kind doesn't work. This has got to be, to me, one of the worst arguments I've ever heard. And I'll tell you exactly why. The biblical concept of kind, and he said no definition can be given. Yes, definitions have been given over and over. Donnie's got a good one. Even the most basic one, reproduce after their kind. That is the idea. But my personal definition, what I like to clarify, is that with the biblical kind, what you're doing is saying, okay, group all the animals that you know are interbreedable. Cats is a really good example. The house cat cannot breed with a tiger, but there is a chain of connecting breedability from cats all the way to tigers, including every cat on the planet. Cheetahs are in there, cougars are in there, bobcats are in there, lynxes are in there, wildcats, the African wildcat. Every single cat is in that chain somewhere. That means they're all the same kind. Now add to that, if you have really good suspicion that they probably did interbreed in the past, you could probably include them. And then add to that, if you have really good genetic evidence that their genomes are similar enough that they likely could have, even if they can't today, then you would include those. So the bottom line is, kinds are the individual trees in the forest, so to speak, of the creation model that do reproduce after their own kind. Now, the reason it's such a bad argument from the evolutionists is because you have to go through this exact same exercise in order to get back to any common ancestry between any two organisms. You have to do the exact same exercise. I don't think I could say that enough times to people like James. You have to trace actual interbreedability back until you find common ancestry between two organisms that are not the same kind in my worldview. So a dog and a cat, for example, you have to know how their pedigree traces back until you get them together. So to say that the kind definition does not work, it absolutely works. It's the same thing that farmers use, and everybody who's ever bred plants or animals, either one, because you are basically picking the ones that have the characteristics that you want. You have to know whether they can breed together or not. You don't put a goat in the pen with a horse because you know they're not the same kind and they can't interbreed. The definition of kind absolutely does work. And then the other thing he said, 99% of species not alive. You're completely ignoring the fact that the species we do have today, and there are only a handful of any given land animal that you can eat, a couple dozen, 200, go as high as you want to on that, but those species come from a single kind, and that is demonstrable, like the cat example, because it is pretty much universally accepted that all cats came from a small population of cats. So that's it.
Okay, here's the next question that comes in from, let me see, get it in chat here. SWE. Put my kids through college, as I always say. Appreciate the support, the super chats, and always great questions for us to engage and dig into. So questions for you, TRock. She's coming at you. And this first one, she asks, Rhodocetus was not fully aquatic. Its pelvis was large to that of land mammals, and it was still connected to the sacral vertebra, meaning it could still support its weight on land. What are your thoughts on that?
I made a comment earlier during the discussion. What I actually said was Rhodocetus was largely aquatic. I did not say it was fully aquatic. I actually have the article. I may have it up. I can't. My screen share is messing up my audio feed, so I can't really do that. But I did actually read up on this very thing on Rhodocetus, and it was mostly aquatic, so not fully aquatic. Okay, I'm not going to disagree with that. But this idea of it could still support its weight on land, when you look at the charts and see Rhodocetus looks more like a dolphin than it does like was it Pachycetus was one of the earliest ones. Even if it was partially dependent on land, it does not have the strength in its back legs to spend very much time out of water at all. It would have been highly dependent on being very near or in water, like 99% of its life.
James, over to you.
Sure, that's a very good point that SWE makes. And this cetacean whale evolution, this is really a tough area for them because it's so well preserved, because these animals live in the water. They tend to fossilize more than you would find land mammals. And we see exactly how this could have happened, how it almost certainly did happen, where these animals began to spend more time near the water. They became more dependent on eating fish as for uh, for their sustenance to keep themselves alive. So the ones that had these adaptations that allowed them to function better in the water had that advantage. They'd be better able to get the food. They'd pass those traits down to their offspring. And slowly, over many millions of years, these adaptations do add up. The DNA, the genetic code is, you can extrapolate it to data. And when you keep making changes to it, you're going to keep making changes to the offspring. At no point can you make changes, but the offspring will always remain the same. These changes are going to add up. And we see this very clearly in the fossil record, exactly how this happened. Yes.
And TRock, you get the last word.
Not a whole lot to say. Not a big point that could be made here. Meaning it can still support its weight on land. Okay, there are several animals still alive today that kind of fit that description, but they have to stay really close to water nonetheless. But the bigger problem with Rhodocedus, as I pointed out earlier, was that they've got the elevation, the erosion, the amount of time that all these things have to happen. Just looking at an elevation map, they just don't make sense from one side of the globe to the other.
All right. Appreciate the engagement on that question. Next one comes in here from God, teach me to pray your word. And it's for you, James W.
Mm-hmm.
Questioner asks, over 100,000 of tons of dirt per year from the Sahara Desert alone are blown into the Atlantic every year. In 8.4 billion years, how would there be any left?
Right. So the Earth is not 8.4 billion years old. I think it's closer to 4.6, so about half that time. And the answer is that Sahara Desert has not been there since the Earth formed. Sahara Desert came around much later through a process known as desertification, of all things. And how this happens is pretty well studied and pretty well known. The desert's not been there this long. I'd have to look to see exactly how long they think that desert's been there, but it definitely hasn't been there that long. So no problem. It's just like the Ken Hovind argument, like, oh, if Niagara Falls was here, if it was billions of years old, it should be way further up. Well, it's because Niagara Falls hasn't been there since the Earth formed. The Earth's crust is dynamic and constantly changing. Features don't stay the same forever. Thank you.
Thank you, James. TRock, go.
So James W. brings up a good point. 100,000 tons of dirt. Maybe he meant 3.4 billion years. I'm not sure, but either way, doesn't matter. One of the points that is always glossed over, actually completely ignored by the evolutionists, is that what James W. is describing here is today's erosion rate. As you wind the clock back in this hypothetical evolutionary storytelling, the moon is closer and closer. The gravitational attraction between the Earth and the moon is stronger and stronger. The cycle of the moon gets shorter and shorter as it draws in closer so that it can conserve angular momentum. Some more physics that you need to address if you're going to be an evolutionist. And so the point is you can't go back very far at all. 100 million years is a flash in the pan compared to the evolutionary storytelling, but 100 million years puts the moon, I did the calculations on this. I want to say the gravitational influence is about 23% stronger than it is today. That is ridiculously strong. The cycles would have been down to something like 24, 25 days at most, and the erosion rates would have gone through the roof, which means earthquakes, tidal waves, everything increases in magnitude. Just another point where evolution storytelling really does not stand up to scrutiny. There's always a rescue device. We'll probably get to hear how, maybe the continents were this way or that way. Maybe the moon was a different distance. Maybe something else happened. What they won't do is just use the common sense physics, which I actually had the equations to demonstrate this for lunar position as you wind back the clock in my PowerPoint slide. Maybe next time we'll bring them out. But anyway, the short answer is today's rates are way too much. 100 million years ago, way, 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 way too much.
All right. Thank you for the responses there, gentlemen. Okay. Next one again comes in from.
Well, I just wanted to add one more thing to it.
Oh, you know what, James? I'm completely. I apologize. That question was for you, so you get the final word. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, doing some extensive research using Google, I found out that the consensus on the age of the Sahara Desert is only 4.6 million years old, which is a drop in the bucket compared to 4.5 billion years that the Earth is here. So this is in no way any type of issue that would be any threat to the long age of the Earth. TRock makes some points about the moon and stuff like that. I'd have to take a look at that, but I would be happy to hit that topic in greater detail at a later date. I don't think the numbers are going to show what that's nearly as big of a problem as he is trying to make it sound.
Okay, thank you, James, for that final word. So next question, another super chat from SWE. Again, thank you so much. And another question for you, TRock. So she asks, how did 1 billion or more cubic miles of fresh water dry up in only 150 days? In brackets, Genesis 7:24. Where is it now?
Okay, so this is another example where the question assumes something completely unrealistic. There is nothing in Genesis that says the water dried up. What you've done is imagined your own version of a mechanism of how a global flood happens. Where did the water go? I like to say more appropriately is how did the land get back up above sea level is probably more appropriate than where did the water go, because in the evolutionary paradigm you also have marine fossils on top of the highest mountains in the world, and you have to figure out either where did the water go or how did the land get up there like that. Anyway, to answer your question, the water recedes specifically from two mechanisms relative to dry land. One of them is continental collision with upheaval, which is something we actually share in common, have some crossover with evolution on tectonic. It's called vertical plate tectonics, pushes land masses up. And when you do that, you have to create space where that land came from, which that's where the water goes. But in addition to that, you also have evidence in the ocean floor of some type of sea floor collapse. It's in the form of guyots. When you look at guyots, there are thousands upon thousands of them. What they are is volcanoes that have had their tops basically flattened off like a mesa out in the desert of Arizona. Because they look like they've been at or very near the surface of the ocean. And then with the collapse, water just has a deeper bowl to fall back into.
TRock, thank you so much. James, if you had anything you wanted to add or response, go ahead. Oh, actually, James, okay, you're good. If you could just re-say maybe the last 3 seconds.
Well, you got to make it work somehow. So, right, you assume the story's true, so it had to happen. So whatever mechanism you can figure out to get rid of the water, it must be how it happened. But it's obvious that the biblical authors, they were not aware of these flood geology or these rapid changes that were going to take place to the Earth's crust. Because we thought, maybe there weren't mountains like there are today before the flood. All that happened during the flood, even though the Bible says that mountains were covered. Yes, even the high mountains. So they didn't think it was a problem because they didn't know anything about anything. So now we come to it, we say, that's kind of a problem. We don't have enough water to cover the top of Mount Everest. So we say, Mount Everest wasn't that high. But you've only got 6,000 years to play with, and we know that these events don't happen. You don't have mountain ranges forming that quick. It's just not how it happens. It's just not consistent with reality. But when you assume something based on faith, you're not dealing in reality, right? You're in fantasy land. Come back to reality, TRock.
Last word, TRock. Question was for you.
Okay, so once again, James likes the diatribe over the science. He can't actually do the science, I don't think. One of the things I put in my PowerPoint, I apologize. I don't know if the audience got to hear this or not, but my computer crashed that most of my stuff was on. That's why I've been struggling with some of this connectivity today. But anyway, in my PowerPoint, I had actually a mathematical model. Here's what you do, James, when you're doing real science. You take a mountain
I'll take
range.
notes.
Yes, please do. So you can
I'll
quit
take
using
notes.
so many bad arguments. What you do is you take a mountain range, you calculate potential energy of the mountain range, you approximate it as a triangle, and so the centroid of the triangle is 1/3 of the height of the triangle, and so the standard equation is P for potential energy equals mass times gravity times height. Now you don't actually have to know the mass of the mountain. What you need to know is the mass of the mountain, the ratio of the mountain's mass to the continent that it sits on, because the next equation is going to be E equals 1/2 mv squared. So what you do is you can calculate the potential energy for the mountain up front, and because you have all the pieces that you need to know, and then you take that value of P and you substitute it in for E, which is just kinetic energy in this case. And when you do that, the mass in E equals 1/2 mv squared. M will be the mass of the continent instead. And again, you don't have to know the actual mass. You just have to know the ratio of the mass between the continent and the mountain. So when you solve for V, V comes out to around. And so I did this on my own and independently came up with the same answer that Baumgartner came up with, and Ord, I think, both did this. I came up with right around 2 meters per second. And so that is a huge continental sprint in the evolutionary paradigm. Now, here's the deal. Again, real world science that we are not hearing from the critics today. Go out and look at the mountain ranges, look at the foldings in the mountain ranges. You don't get solid rock folded like that by slowly shoving it up, bending it a little bit at a time. That's not how the elastic property of rock is just not there to support such a thing. So it implies that not only can you solve for the actual velocity of the continent, you can also match it up with the folds in the rock and see that that rock actually formed quickly, folded quickly, hardened quickly.
All right. To SWE, thanks for the question. And James and TRock, great answers. Okay, so here's the next one. This one is now for you, James. So we got a solid mix of questions for the both of you. This one comes in from Lisa. Lisa, appreciate it. So she asks, hi, Donnie, question for James. If the Bible is fiction, how can you explain the accuracy needed to build an ark that would withstand a year's worth of seaworthiness?
Well, what she's talking about there is the ratio, the length to the width of the ark. They say it's the proper ratio, it's the optimum ratio for ships. But first of all, no, it would not withstand a year in the ocean. It's just way too big for a wooden boat to be able to function. We've never built a wooden boat that big that was seaworthy. Even if the dimensions are, the ratio is right, it's just way too big. And so how did they know the ratio? Look, these were written, say, maybe 800, 900 BC, push it back maybe to 1,000. People were not dumb back then. It's not that they didn't know anything. There were people building boats back then. They had an idea of how you build a boat and how you make a seaworthy vessel. So it is not inconceivable that they would have, in building a boat, how do we build a boat? What's, to make the story work? It does not mean that they actually build the boat. It's just that whoever wrote it actually knew a little bit about building a seaworthy vessel. They actually did their homework when they wrote the chapter.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Lisa. And TRock, over to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Lisa. James is factually just completely incorrect in his assessment that nobody's ever built a boat this big. Now, when you talk about how big a boat is, you gotta distinguish between volume and length and that sort of thing. There are wooden boats in history that rival the size of the Ark. The difference is they were built as sailing vessels, and the Ark was not. But one of the common objections to this whole thing is that skeptics don't think they would have known how to build such a thing. There is no way it could be made to survive the violent waves and this, that, and the other. It's really just it's just a bad philosophical argument. One of the things I put into my PowerPoint slide was a review, and I would ask James this. Maybe this isn't the time for you to actually answer this, so you don't have to spend a lot of time on it. But I went back and you need a good philosophical review of what people were like back then. And one of the things that we do know from history is that people, just like me, were very pragmatic. They did not waste their time with a lot of silliness like playing video games. I know video games didn't exist, but they didn't waste nearly the amount of time on entertainment stuff. So they were very pragmatic. But go back and look at the megaliths, and perhaps James can explain to us one day how those megalithic stones were cut. And I'd love to hear all about it, because here we are. We have these stones right here in front of us that we can look at. We can take measurements. We can handle them with our hands. We can do chemical analysis. And yet the experts cannot figure out how they were done by ancient civilizations. So when you look at something like the Ark, you already know extremely intelligent people who were extremely pragmatic existed then. So there is nothing incredible about the Ark. It's just one of those things, just like the pyramids. We just don't really know how they built it. But to suggest that it couldn't have been done is just another, kind of a bad philosophical argument.
Thank you, TRock. James, the question was for you. You get the last word.
Right. So I'm pretty sure that the Ark was larger, at least lengthwise, than any boat that has ever been made. And the boats that were made that were significantly shorter than that had significant problems. They were not seaworthy. That's why we stopped building large vessels out of wood. Wood is just not a good material for building large ships. It's too pliable. And even those ships that they did build that were significantly smaller than the Ark had to run with bilge pumps going on nearly 24 hours a day just to keep them afloat. They didn't have bilge pumps in the Bible. I know he thinks that they probably came up with some other way of keeping the water out because they were so much smarter than we are today. I know that's part of the paradigm, that they were a lot smarter back then and that our intelligence has degraded today. We can't build the pyramids today, so we don't know exactly how they do it. I think we do have, even if we don't know exactly how they were done, I think we do have some good ideas. And the fact that there's something that we don't know is not a license for us to engage in fantasy and invoking theology and saying it must have been secret knowledge delivered to them by a deity, or their intelligence just must have been so much greater than ours today, even though they knew almost nothing about the natural world.
Okay, thank you, James. And the next question is going to be for... This one's going to be for you, TRock. So again, SWE, $5 super chat. Again, to everybody who's shown some love over the last two debates. We've been pretty well doing debates since 8 p.m. So been a ton of fun. Okay, SWE, $5 super chat. Tree sloths. This one's for you, TRock. Tree sloths are only found in tropical America. Are you saying they swum the seas or walked through the frozen Arctic to get from Mount Ararat to Brazil?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. It just sounded like you cut off all of a sudden. Okay. No. Okay. Good question. But I'll be honest with you. It's another one of those, it's kind of a false dichotomy, sort of. Your options are evolution or the animal took itself there. It's a false dichotomy. It's actually, and so James kind of highlighted this idea a little bit earlier. He kept saying, "Oh, you have to appeal to this and appeal to that." No, what I have to do is show that there are reasonable natural solutions on the earth. That's what I've got to do. And that is exactly what evolutionists do, or attempt to do anyway, is try to show natural solutions that are plausible. And so if I can show that there is a natural, plausible solution to this problem of tree sloths, then it's kind of a non-argument from the critics. And so the answer is, it is a false dichotomy of sorts. There's another option, and that is that people took them there. And another option is that people took them to a lot of different places, and they didn't live anywhere else for similar reasons. Climate was not conducive for them. Predation might have wiped out populations in some places. Do not expect to find fossils just because maybe tree sloths lived on another continent, for a couple thousand years is in no way a reason to imply that we should find fossils of them there. But the thing is, when we talk about the flood history given in the Bible, we are talking about people who obviously are geared up to take care of animals. They understand the animals' needs. And so the other thing is, people have always carried animals across the globe. There is nothing new about it. And people have always employed animals for their aid in cultivation, farming, that kind of thing. Nothing new about that either. So to me, an easy solution is people took them to a number of places, and that's the only place that they actually survived to modern times.
Thank you, TRock. James, the floor is yours.
Or we could just go with the more conventional explanation. What the record shows is that these animals live where they live, and they have lived there for millions of years. Their ancestors lived there because it's a conducive environment for them to live. And maybe people took them. Maybe they took them here and there, and they didn't survive anywhere else. I mean, once again, when you're accepting that this is true from the start, then whatever mechanism you can come up with, whatever ad hoc explanation will be gobbled up gleefully, as long as you can keep believing the story. And it's not that they don't have ad hoc explanations. They've had thousands of years to come up with them. They're very good at it. It's just when you have to sit there and systematically come up with different explanations for why nothing looks like what it should look from their paradigm, then after a while you have to ask yourself, do you really care if it's true, or do you just want to keep believing it because you just want to keep believing it?
Last word goes to you, TRock.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for an actual scientific rebuttal. What James does not seem to be aware of is, as I've already pointed out, people have been carrying animals across the globe for thousands of years for a variety of reasons. Cane toads, for example, were taken, I believe, to Australia. They ended up going rampant. We've got a case of pythons in North America, where people have brought them up from South America as pets, turned them loose. Not exactly a farmer's idea. Nonetheless, it's still personal transport by humans. Something that actually, it's kind of funny. It's a little closer to home, I think. It does for me, because I got a hilarious story behind it, but I'll keep it short. Not in the not too distant past, as in just a handful of years ago, people brought kangaroos over to North America to see if they could basically take hold in the plains here in North America, similar to the way they do in Australia. And so again, this isn't special pleading. I'm not just making up bizarre fairy tales to support my position. This is real world human behavior. It's what people do. And so it is, and I would agree with James. Yeah, those tree sloths, they have ancestors in tropical America. Okay. But they've probably only been there for about 4,400 years. So anyway, real human behavior. We take animals across the globe.
All right. George Bond, he's been kind enough to serve us pizza and ice cream for the doubleheader debate night. So George, much appreciated. I'm sure we're going to be feeling great after pizza and ice cream. So we'll be ready for a nap. Pizza, ice cream, and coffee. Sounds like a good night. So, okay, this one comes in from Stephen Tibbetts. And this one is for you, James. So he asks, the Wyoming in 1909 was 450 feet long, 16 years before sinking. How much longer would it have lasted without those 6 masts warping the wood? Ark had to last a year.
Yeah. Of course, the Wyoming, like I say, had bilge pumps running nearly 24/7 that they wouldn't have had. Um, yeah, and to think that they could build something like that thousands of years ago out of wood, something we can't do today, is not the same as saying like, oh, we don't know exactly how they built the pyramids, because we could build rock structures like that today. We can't build something like the Ark today and make it float. I mean, Ken Ham built his Ark there, and he used modern equipment, and they were thinking about putting real animals on it until they realized that the amount of staff they would need, it would be ludicrous to think 8 people could have done it when you would need dozens of people running a staff to take care of that Ark. And his Ark had water damage, of all things, not from raining 40 days and 40 nights, just from raining. This this idea to think that it could have worked, we just don't have any evidence for it. It doesn't work today. It wouldn't have worked back then. And the authors didn't know that. No one had ever built a boat that big in history. So they didn't know that this was longer than it would exceed the length limit for a wooden vessel. They didn't know that. No one had ever came even close to that. All they know is we need a really big boat to fill it up with animals to repopulate the world. So they made a story about a really big boat.
Thank you, James. And TRock. You have a response? Go ahead.
I'll try and be quick. Thank you, George, for the virtual pizza and ice cream. I really did love your and Matt's and Redefine Living's discussion on geology and the fossil record and all that. And the Fulgurite thing is a really good argument. And thank you, James, for making my job so easy. Yeah, you said a lot of things. I'm going to have a hard time remembering and covering everything. What stood out? Production rate really stands out here. You still seem to completely mask over the fact that this was a sailing vessel and the Ark was not. They're completely 2 different things. If you've ever built anything in your life, you might would understand that a little bit. The Ark did not have to endure the types of stresses that sailing vessels do, and they weren't even. And so the other point is lost technology. I already pointed out, I seriously doubt you have a clue how ancient megaliths were cut, even though they're right in front of your face, because the experts don't seem to know either. If you ever want to know, maybe one of these days I'll tell you how they were done. But anyway, production rate really stands out here too, because we do have pyramids in front of us. Can people kind of figure out how to build a pyramid? Kind of, sort of. But one of the big problems is no construction company in the world would commit to the timeline that the Egyptians built the pyramids in. Nobody can figure out, even if they know how it was done, they can't figure out how fast it was done. It completely blows modern engineers' minds how fast they built them, and so there is actually much more lost technology in that than what you've alluded to. So, yeah, try comparing the Ark to something that's not a sailing vessel.
Thank you, TRock. And James, question was for you. Get the last word.
Well, nobody's ever built a ship like that. You build ships to sail. It's still the lengthwise. You're talking about physics. You're talking about the length of the wood, and wood warps, especially something that long, sailing or not, wood is going to warp. And humans are great. Humans are intelligent, industrious people, and we've been building big structures. We've been doing things like that for a long time. No, you might not know exactly how it was done, but there are archaeologists, there are scientists working on that very issue right now. They're trying to make discoveries, and we know it was something that was done in different parts of the world. We have pyramid type structures in the New World. We have pyramid type structures in Egypt. But just the fact that, like I said before, our ignorance or our lack of perfect knowledge on a topic is not licensed to engage in pseudoscience or fantasy. or to think that they had some type of secret technology that that we don't have access to, because there's no evidence that they did. They built these structures using the technology that was available to them, and yeah, one day maybe we'll know exactly how they did it, but I'm sure when we do, it'll be with conventional technology that they would have had access to. No magic required.
James, thank you so much. And the next question, I got to say, this is why I like to point out that our audience during these debates, I greatly appreciate how engaged they are. We could seriously do audience Q&As all night long. We get some great questions. So what we'll do is kind of wrap it up, one or two more questions max, because I do want to respect the time of the debaters. We are coming up at 3 hours. So great endurance, James and TRock. Okay, here we go. Question comes in from C Science Film Labs. This one is a question for the both of you. And so James, I think you started the last one, so I guess we can have TRock start this one. So he asks, for James and TRock, how much of the planet would you assume? How much of the planet do you assume would flood if 16,000 Antarctic ice cap melted?
I mean, I don't have a real good frame of reference to answer this, but I suspect probably upwards of 40%, because what you would get besides the obvious low-level flooding is you would also get tons and tons of accelerated erosion, which would bring the continents down even further. So, yeah, it would be very, very devastating.
Okay, James, over to you.
Yeah, like T-Rock, this isn't something I've done a lot of research into beforehand, but we know that over the history of Earth, the ice caps, the size of ice on Earth has gone up and it's gone down. T-Rock, for example, puts an ice age in human history, which we don't seem to have records of. I know he's probably going to say, oh, no, there are records of it. We really did have an ice age that, even though no reputable scholars think there was an ice age in the past few thousand years, that the last ice age was, 10 to 12,000 years ago, if not longer. But yeah, to tell you the truth, I don't know exactly how much it would melt, but we're probably going to find out. We are probably going to find out, because at the rate we're pumping carbon into the atmosphere, and at the rate those ice caps are melting, we'll be conducting a live science experiment to see how much longer me here in Florida will be above ground.
Okay, question was for the both of you. So C Science Film Labs, thank you so much. And to the debaters, thanks for the question. So let's see what we have here in the Q&A section as we kind of wind it down.
I'm good for a couple more if you, I don't know what T-Rock's time is like.
I'm good at just whatever you guys want to do. I'm fine with. I'm
okay.
Doing just fine here.
All right, you guys are great. You guys are great. So, here we go. Question for James W. And question comes in from God, teach me to pray your word. And he asks, have you ever heard of aquaponics, not sure if I'm saying that right, growing with just water and nutrients?
Like hydroponics, I think I've heard of that, growing plants with no soil, just with water, and I guess infusing the nutrients into the water. I guess it works. I don't see how that would work in a global flood model where you would have salt water, which is not good for most plants. And that's the thing. We have a diversity of plants. We have some plants that grow good in certain places. We have some plants that grow good in other places. But in this type of environment, you would have the entire world being under this tumultuous ocean. You'll say it's not tumultuous. It was fine, peaceful. It was just underwater, but enough to cause all these major land formations that we see today. I think there had to be significant amount of activity going on in that water. And yeah, not the ideal condition for growing plants through hydroponics.
Okay, thank you for the response. James, TRock, the floor is yours.
Yeah, to answer the question directly, well, he's asking James, have you ever heard of aquaponics? Yes, I have. I know what they are. I mean, the rough concept. I'm not an expert in plant horticulture, but yes, I know what aquaponics or hydroponics
Yeah.
is. It is kind of another really good point that James W. is making here, and that is that people have always been extremely innovative. And so you tried to make a point earlier about, some kind of secret lost technology. The bottom line is, James, your great great grandparents knew how to do things you don't know how to do. That is human nature. Technology does get lost over time, and my megalithic example was a real good example that demonstrates that, because you have them right in front of you and you still can't figure it out. But as far as plants can't grow in that alleged environment that James has in his head, what he doesn't know, apparently, from lack of reading the biblical text, is that the full inundation of the earth probably only lasted for a few weeks. It was 150 days of water ascension before the following 170 days of water going down. So it's reasonable that only a few weeks that the entire earth was underwater. So it's not all subject to the same exposure to salinity. But even at that, rain, as I already pointed out earlier in the conversation, is a distilling process. And so Noah and his family would have had no problem whatsoever finding fresh water.
Okay, James, you get the last word. The
Well,
question was for you.
plus the fact that under his theory, most of this water is coming from subterranean water chambers. Like I said, the ones God preloaded the world with, so he could commit the genocide that he knew he was going to have to commit. So this water would have been extremely hot coming out. These water down there is very hot. And for it to be able to raise the sea levels that much in that period of time, it's going to have to be a lot of water coming out. And that water is going to be hot. The oceans would have been boiling. Nothing would have survived. No fish for the snakes to eat. No sea life whatsoever. The heat problem is real. We didn't get to cover it very much, but it definitely is a significant issue for the flood narrative.
Well, gentlemen, we made it. Great job to the both of you. Great job to the audience. This really was a fantastic debate, comprehensive, thorough. I particularly love this topic because there's always a ton of great points to discuss. So as we typically do, though, before we shut it down for good, let's get some final thoughts, final words from the debaters. Again, to everybody in the audience, if you're just joining us, especially, I do want to remind you that this was debate number 2 in our, Standing for Truth Ministries, a double header debate night. First debate was Kent Hovind and Taylor from the Snake Was Right YouTube channel. They debated transitional fossils, and lots of good feedback on that debate already. It was fun. It was entertaining. It was fast paced, just like this one. So TRock and James W. Debated here tonight, Noah's flood and Noah's ark, and they did a great job at making for a debate to remember. So James, TRock, let's get some final thoughts, final words. Why don't we start with you, James? Again, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being here. Final thoughts, final words.
Thanks for having me, Donnie. Thank you, TRock, for the debate. I think I know I had a lot of fun. I think you seem to enjoy yourself. Hopefully I provided you with some good entertainment. And yeah, it was a good discussion. I'd love to come back and tackle another topic or something maybe more specific.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, we'll definitely have to get a round 2 between you two guys, because we could definitely have a series of debates. The TRock versus James W. trilogy.
Oh, it could go down in history.
TRock, thank you for being here, giving us your time, and final thoughts, final words.
Yeah, I suppose I need to thank the good Lord himself for preserving his word the way he did, and giving us logic and reason to be able to put these things together. Thank you, James, for joining in the discussion. I know I probably come across a little abrasive and a little bit aggressive sometimes, but that's more my passion. Absolutely no bad feelings towards you at all. A little bit harsh, I know, but anyway, science, I think what I demonstrate very well is that I'm willing to tackle actual working laboratory type science. And the biblical critics rarely ever are. So these conversations are, to me, they're kind of easy, but they're fun because, I think most creationists enjoy being able to show how they literally use real world science. Anyway, thank you, Donnie, for hosting us, and a quick shout out to the audience again. Thank you for the really good questions. Really brings out some good points. And I would also like to say, if you have a question that did not get answered, you can just tag me in the comments after the video is posted. And I do browse the comments occasionally to see what people say. And I'll be glad if you have a serious question, serious objection, whatever. I'm not really willing to entertain a whole lot of the ad hominem and, the bizarre logical fallacies and all that kind of stuff that people do. But if you have a real question, by all means, post it in the comments after this video gets posted on YouTube, and I'll be glad to engage you and provide the best answer I know how.
I just want to say we'll probably be having an after show tomorrow night on the Amy Newman channel, probably 11 or 12. TRock, if you want to come on there, and we'd be happy to have you on there if you want.
What was your time zone, James?
Eastern time.
You're in Eastern time?
I am in Eastern time, down in the armpit of Florida.
I'll just have to say it's a definite maybe. I'm in Oklahoma, so I am an hour ahead of you, I think, and so it might make sense for me. But I'll be honest with you, I
think you're behind. You're in Central time?
Yeah, right. Sorry, behind. I mean,
yeah, you're an hour behind. Yeah,
right. I mean, my clock says 10 o'clock when yours says 11. But yeah, anyway.
Amy Newman, that's the channel that we're on. So if you want to come on, we'd love to have you on. But
yeah, the only thing I will say is that I'm personally not interested in the bizarre conversations that just hurl a bunch of nonsense. I prefer the technical, serious conversations. I honestly don't know what the dynamic of yours and Amy's show is, but if it's not a serious technical conversation, I won't be interested.
Well, we'll let you say whatever you want to say, make whatever argument you want to say.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Well, gentlemen, again, appreciate it. I was on one of James W. and Amy Newman's after show a few weeks back. I believe that was the fun. James W. and Kent Hovind debate, and I had fun. So it was me and all my evolutionist pals, wasn't it? So we had a good technical discussion.
It was like a full panel, like Donnie versus 9 atheists.
Donnie versus the world. Yeah, that brought me back.
He was going at him Chuck Norris style, or like the Matrix style, trying to dodge all these arguments. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that brought me back to my beginning days or founding days of Standing for Truth. Google Hangouts, where I would jump into these Hangout Skylar Fiction and all these channels, and it'd be one on 9, and it was fun. So, okay, well, James W., that channel, Amy Newman's channel, is in the description box. TRock, you don't really have a channel, but I do have your previous debates, at least a few of them, linked in the description box as well for people to check out. So again, to the audience, great job, especially to those who stuck with us for the entire night. We've been streaming, we've been debating since 8 p.m. And so this concludes the the double-header debate night. Again, leave your feedback and comments. Let me know if if you thought it was worthwhile, if you thought it was worth it. Okay, I'm going to let the debaters get out of here. As always, I stick around for a few minutes going over reminders. And James, TRock, you both earned the night off. Okay, so we'll talk to you guys soon.
Tommy.
And I'll
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
All right, there we go. That concludes the night. 2 debates, 2 epic debates, I would say. Heroic. Whatever solid words I can use to describe this doubleheader night, double debate night. Noah's Flood, Noah's Ark, TRock, James W. Transitional Fossils, Kent Hovind, and Snake was right. So, I usually say there's another one in the books, and I'll say that is 2 more in the books. We're also very, very close to hitting 10,000 subscribers. So please share around this content, because critical thinking is so important. It's exactly why we host so many debates on so many different topics, because this is a way that we uphold critical thinking, is we get people with different views and different positions, differing opinions, to enter the octagon and discuss these differences in a sophisticated and yet respectful manner. So please share around this content, share around this channel, get your friends, your family to subscribe, as we are so close to hitting the 10,000 subscriber mark. So also, I believe after next week, we will at that point have had moderated and hosted, I should say, 200 debates. So, these 3 days with this one coming to an end, 4 debates in 3 days. If I can get the graphics up here again. Final reminder, tomorrow/today in a way, the 29th, Atheist Junior and Dr. Dino. This one is, a lot of people are looking forward to this one. I'm sure it's going to be great. Wade the Wizard and Dr. Dino the next day on the 30th. Okay. So that's going to be awesome. Then Saturday, presentation on Standing for Truth with Dr. Jerry Bergman. This will be his 3rd time here. And I am very much looking forward to this one, as I think it's the first time we've had this specific topic, C.S. Lewis, anti-Darwinist. So if you've got questions for Dr. Bergman here, make sure you bring them. We're going to be doing this live, as we always do. And as I explained earlier, we've been doing a bunch of open mic discussions, panel discussions on, all things soteriology. So John 15, James 2, Romans 1. And Saturday night, our panel discussion series continues. It'll be Romans 8, I believe. So if you're interested in those kinds of discussions, please do, please do show up. Then we've also got, in that same week, next week, that is, the King James only controversy debate, Turretin Fan and Will Kinney. And also Matt Slick will be back here. Matt Slick and John Barton. They're going to be debating, is oneness biblical? So this is going to be a ton of fun as well. And last but not least, our next doubleheader night, I believe, is either the 6th or the 7th. It's been a long night, so I can't remember, but you can have a look at the event section. This is all just a snapshot of the overall content, events, debates that we do have, set for everybody. And so the next doubleheader, I believe, is the 7th. We're going to have a solid debate on soteriology, free grace, lordship, what is true biblical salvation, John Crawford, J.D. Martin. And then right after that, an hour, I guess, or so after that, we're going to have Kelly Powers and Taylor Stewart. They're going to be debating Unitarianism. Is Unitarianism biblical? So that should be the next big double header. And question in the live chat, when is Donnie debating again? Good question. I know I've got a few that I am working on scheduling a discussion with me in terms of this podcast I've been doing, Creation versus Evolution, the Creation versus Evolution conversation. So given that I host and moderate so many debates, and I've been making a lot of appearances on other channels. So check the community post I put out last night. I've done an interview that is posted now on Christ Jesus Ministry. Christopher Cernicate did a fantastic job putting that together and editing it. I made an appearance on Rebecca from Bread of Life's Examining Evolution channel. We discussed ERVs, endogenous retroviruses, and I was also on Kelly Powers' channel, and we discussed creation, evolution, age of the earth, so on and so forth. So what I've been doing is trying to fit in conversations with evolutionists, those of the opposite position of myself, and we've been doing it in podcast form. So I am supposed to be having Luca Medugno. We will be debating ERVs, again, endogenous retroviruses, soon, definitely in the next several weeks. He is now Luca Medugno. People know him in the chat. Great guy. He's done a ton of debates, and he's gone through my book. And so, we're going to analyze that. We're going to debate that and discuss it. So we're not too sure if we're going to do that in formal debate style or do it in terms of our SFT conversation podcast style. So we'll see. I did do a really, really thorough one a week or two ago with Andrew Cumming. He joined me on the SFT Creation versus Evolution Conversation podcast, and we discussed endogenous retroviruses for a couple hours. So yeah, I'm in the works, scheduling a few. Actually, I may do one with Conspiracy Cats. Actually, we may have a discussion on endogenous retroviruses. I think that's going to be on his channel, though. So there's a lot. If only there were more hours in the day, or I could experience a whole genome duplication, then there could be two Donnies to go around. You could have the Donnie who moderates and the Donnie who debates. So if you appreciate all the work, that's being done here, and the debates, the interviews, and you find it on your heart to want to support us, check us out on Patreon. Check us out over the website, Standing for Truth Ministries.com. So again, that's pretty much it. I think that wraps up the night, guys. That's a doubleheader. Leave your comments, feedback. I would appreciate that. And again, we will see you tomorrow night. Dr. Dino and Atheist Jr., the Evolution Debate Challenge Series. God bless everybody.